In the beginning, they say, God spoke light into being. But which light was it? The one from Genesis, or the one whispered in Jubilees, where the weeks of years mark time like secret steps of a heavenly clock? There is a book lost to many, yet ancient in its bones, the Book of Jubilees, known to Ethiopians as holy, yet forgotten by Rome, revered by some Hebrews, yet cast aside by later hands, a book that dares to retell the stories we thought we knew. In Genesis, the world unfolds over 6 days. In Jubilees, it is mapped by angels and sealed in heavenly tablets. In Genesis, Isaac was bound upon the altar. In Jubilees, the command comes with explanation, and Satan, or rather Mastema, is named as the one who demanded it. Does this not change everything? They told us Enoch walked with God, but Jubilees says he wrote laws of purity, Sabbaths, and feasts long before Sinai ever smoked with divine fire. The law of Moses, older than Moses. And what of the angels? Were they God's messengers or watchers sent to teach forbidden things? Jubilees gives them names, roles, failings. It speaks of Nephilim, of giants born from rebellion, of heaven entangled with flesh. The Trinity, Jubilees does not whisper it. The cross, it is not there. Jesus is never named. Yet echoes of his doctrine seem to sleep in the shadows of its verses, like a song played in reverse. In the Quran, stories are reshaped again. Ishmael is honored, prophets are protected, the law is guarded. And unlike the Bible, where prophets fall into lust and error, the Quran and Jubilees share a strange agreement. Righteousness is not optional, it is ordained. So what happens when Jubilees agrees with Islam more than the Church? Why is it closer to the Quran's perfection of prophets, its celestial order, its rejection of drunkenness and sin among the chosen? And why, oh why, was Jubilees banned from the Bible? The Church called it false, yet it was once read beside Genesis. It names angels, defines calendars, and insists that Moses did not simply receive a law, but that the law had always existed in the heavens. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of the Watchers, all cast away, all hiding strange truths. What if there were patterns written in the sky and Jubilees was the map? What if the prophets were not broken men but sinless? What if Satan had a name before the New Testament, and his role was ancient? We have lived by stories layered in centuries of tradition. But what if one ancient book sought to clean the story, reorder time, restore the covenant? And what if its silence today is not accidental? The Book of Jubilees says Abraham kept the Torah before it was ever given, that Jacob vowed the festivals, that Noah warned of judgment, and angels recorded every deed long before paper ever held ink. So then the greatest question rises from the dust. Which version is true? Was Isaac the chosen son, or was the real covenant given through Ishmael? Did Moses write the law, or simply copy it from above? Did Jesus come to fulfill prophecy, or were the prophecies rewritten? What was hidden and why? And if Jubilees is closer to the Quran than to the Church, what does that mean? Whose scripture survives unchanged? And most haunting of all, what if these stories were never meant to agree? In the beginning, there was order, not chaos. There was symmetry, not mystery. The Book of Jubilees tells us that time itself was crafted with precision, not poetry. It claims that God did not merely speak creation into existence over 6 divine days, but rather laid it down upon heavenly tablets, structured by 7-year cycles, and measured through weeks of years that would echo across all generations. While Genesis begins with a sweeping breath, "Let there be light," Jubilees begins with documentation, a heavenly scroll dictated to Moses on Mount Sinai, not just as history but as eternal law. It is a retelling that does not whisper but declares. Creation was not random. It was recorded. It was planned piece by piece in rhythms of seven, echoing the perfection of divine timing. Moses, according to Jubilees, was not simply a prophet receiving commandments. He was a scribe being told the full story of everything, from Adam to Abraham, by an angel of the presence. This was not revelation through vision or burning bush. This was transcription, and what Moses received was more than law. He was told how creation began, how angels were assigned to the elements, how the heavens and earth were not simply built in a rush of divine will but unfolded by design. It is here that Jubilees separates itself, not only from Genesis but from every telling that came after. The world, it insists, was not just formed, it was formatted. The Sabbath was sanctified before humanity walked. The laws of purity, the feasts, the calendar of heaven, they all existed before man was shaped from dust. In the traditional Genesis account, we watch Adam and Eve wander through the garden, fall to temptation, and bear sons who fracture the world with violence. Yet in Jubilees, we are told how long they lived in the garden, exact years, exact days. We are told when Eve conceived, when Cain murdered, and how Adam mourned. Time is no longer a flowing river in this version. It is a grid, divinely measured. Jubilees names even the months when things occurred, planting the events of early humanity within a heavenly calendar that was later abandoned. And it mourns that loss. The book calls the later lunar calendar, adopted by many Jews and then Christians, an error. It claims the true reckoning of time was a solar cycle of 364 days, a perfect year, 4 equal seasons, no drifting feasts, no moving Sabbaths, only precision as it was in heaven. Why was time so important? Because, according to Jubilees, obedience to God was not just moral, it was chronological. The feasts, the Sabbath, the sacrifices, they were not invented by men like Moses or Aaron. They were kept by the angels in heaven long before. Creation itself was holy not just because of what was made, but when it was made. This is the mystery at the heart of Jubilees, that time is not neutral, that it is sacred. And that forgetting the true calendar is part of humanity's fall. For in Jubilees, sin is not only disobedience, it is forgetfulness, forgetting time, forgetting law, forgetting the heavenly pattern. But Jubilees does not stop at time, it rewrites stories, and it begins with the garden. In Genesis, Eve speaks to a serpent. In Jubilees, the tempter is not just a snake, he is a spirit, satanic, rebellious, the beginning of Mastema's work. The fall of man becomes not only about human weakness but about spiritual war. The angels had roles. Some were good, some fell. Jubilees aligns this with the later traditions of Enoch and the Apocrypha, drawing a sharper line between the watchers and the rebellious ones who taught magic, weaponry, and seduction. These spirits, it says, continue to afflict humanity, and they were not simply defeated in Eden. They remained, and they still do. Then comes Cain and Abel. Genesis tells us of jealousy and murder. Jubilees adds timing, consequences, exile with greater detail. It tells us Cain married his sister Awan, that his line continued, that Adam mourned him even as he mourned Abel. Jubilees stretches the bones of each verse from Genesis and fills them with flesh, years, relationships, generations. It gives names to the nameless and law to the lawless. As we move forward, Jubilees declares that Enoch did more than walk with God. He was taken into the heavens to record judgment, to mark years, and to establish the calendar for all generations. This is not merely the Enoch who disappears from the world in mystery. This is a prophet entrusted with the divine archive. Jubilees lifts Enoch into a role that mirrors what Islam will later affirm. A man chosen, elevated, kept pure. A man who did not die but ascended. Then Noah. Jubilees once again adds what Genesis omits. Noah is not merely a righteous man, He is a lawgiver. He commands his children in purity. He offers sacrifices that match Mosaic law. He is given books. He is told secrets. And when the flood ends, he curses spirits. He prays to God about the unclean spirits that still roam the earth. And God sends angels to bind some, but leaves a tenth of them under the authority of Mastema, the great accuser. Yes, Satan has a name in Jubilees, and a function. He is permitted by God to test, to accuse, to punish. Much like the Quran's depiction of Iblis, he is not equal to God, but bound by divine limits. Here we begin to see how Jubilees echoes the Quran more than the Church. For in this book, prophets do not sin openly. They do not fall to drunkenness or incest. Jubilees rewrites even the shame of Noah, presenting him as a man misrepresented. It protects the honor of the righteous, even while admitting human struggle. In doing so, it reflects the Islamic view of prophets, fallible in body but protected in purpose. And perhaps the most radical rewrite comes in the form of Abraham. Jubilees does not simply tell us he was called from Ur. It tells us he learned to reject idolatry as a boy, that he destroyed the idols of his father, that he fasted, that he read the books of his ancestors, and that he kept the law of God before it was ever given on Sinai. This is Abraham the Muslim in all but name, a man who surrendered, a man who submitted, a man who did not need a formal Torah to follow God's will, because the law had already been written in the heavens. So here we must pause and ask, what does this mean for Genesis, for the Bible? If the law predates Moses, if the feasts were celebrated by angels, if time itself was a divine commandment, then was Sinai a reminder, not a beginning? And if prophets like Enoch and Noah and Abraham were already righteous by a law older than Torah, then was the covenant ever truly new? The Quran says it plainly. The guidance was always one. From Noah to Abraham to Moses to Jesus to Mohammed, Jubilees, buried in Apocrypha, dares to say the same, that the story did not begin with Moses, that the pattern is eternal. But the Bible, as we know it today, does not include Jubilees. It was stripped away, excluded, labeled as pseudepigrapha. Only the Ethiopian church kept it. Why? Perhaps because it challenged too much, perhaps because it revealed too much. So now we are left with a choice. Which Genesis will we believe? The one shaped by Babylonian exile, edited by scribes, curated by councils, or the one dictated to Moses by an angel of the presence? One begins with poetry, the other begins with records. One leaves room for mystery, the other demands precision. And if Jubilees was right, if God's law, his time, and his order were known from the beginning, then what does that mean for all the stories that came after? What if Genesis is not the first word? What if the beginning was hidden in Jubilees all along? Abraham walked alone beneath the stars, but the book of Jubilees insists he did not walk in confusion. He was not simply a man chosen by chance or grace, but a seeker of truth from his youth. While Genesis introduces him as a quiet figure suddenly called by God, Jubilees paints a deeper portrait. A boy who questioned the idols of his father, who rejected the gods of his people, who saw the stars and knew they were not divine. At just 14 years old, Abraham fasted for truth. He meditated on the order of the heavens, not for astrology, but to discern the hidden unity behind all things. Jubilees tells us he destroyed the idols in his father's house and stood against Nimrod's false religion. This Abraham is not passive. He is revolutionary, and his righteousness did not begin with a divine command. It began with divine intuition. As Jubilees unfolds, Abraham's story becomes one of returning to a forgotten path. He is taught the law, he keeps the Sabbath, he celebrates Passover long before the Exodus. He builds altars not only out of faith but with ritual precision. His obedience is not based on mystery but memory, as if the law was already within him. When he journeys to Egypt, it is not merely survival, it is a test of worship. And when he returns, he teaches his children. He warns Isaac. He commands Jacob. The covenant, according to Jubilees, is a long chain, not a sudden fire. It is not Sinai that births the law, it is Abraham who revives it. Yet in Genesis, we are left to fill in many blanks. We do not know why Abraham was chosen. We do not see him reject idolatry. We are not told he kept the feasts. But Jubilees dares to fill the silence. And in doing so, it places Abraham in the company of prophets as defined by Islam, righteous from the beginning, chosen for their submission, not their mistakes. Jubilees does not allow the chosen to fall into public sin. Its prophets are guardians of a heavenly pattern. In this way, it mirrors the Quran's claim that guidance was always one path, restored again and again. The story of Isaac's near sacrifice takes a sharper turn in Jubilees. In Genesis, it is God who commands Abraham to offer his son. But in Jubilees, the angel reveals that it was Mastema, the adversary, who asked for the test. God permits it, but it is not his initiative. This subtle shift rewrites the nature of the command. No longer is God portrayed as one who demands a child's death to prove loyalty. Instead, Satan requests the trial, and God allows it only to expose Abraham's unwavering faith. This is a profound difference. The same story, told through a different lens, becomes a statement about God's justice, his mercy, and his unwillingness to be painted as cruel. Even the identity of the bound son carries tension. While Jubilees aligns with Genesis in naming Isaac, its emphasis on obedience, on covenantal law-keeping, and on the early favor upon Jacob raises haunting questions about Ishmael. Though he is sent away, Jubilees records Abraham's sorrow, his prayers, and God's promise to make Ishmael a great nation. Yet in contrast, the Quran makes a stronger case, that Ishmael, not Isaac, was the sacrificial son. That the son who submitted became the father of submission, Islam, and that the Kaaba, not Mount Moriah, would become the center of remembrance. These differing details form the heart of 1,000 years of debate. Jubilees does not solve the dispute, but it reveals that even in ancient texts, the certainty was not complete. Then comes Jacob, renamed Israel. In Genesis, his life is filled with deception, favoritism, and struggle. He tricks his brother, flees from home, wrestles with God. But in Jubilees, the shadows are softened. Jacob is still a man of conflict, but he is guided. He is faithful. He keeps the laws of purity. He vows to tithe. He observes the feasts. He does not merely wrestle with God in the night. He is visited by angels, warned of dangers, given visions. Jubilees aims to redeem Jacob, not as a schemer, but as a patriarch shaped by divine order. And again, the Quran shares this impulse. Jacob, or Yaqub, is presented as a prophet of high honor, a father who teaches, warns, and submits. The brothers of Joseph are also re-examined. Jubilees does not shy away from their cruelty, but it assigns greater responsibility to Reuben and Judah. It records prayers. It reveals regret. It explains motives. Joseph himself is not merely a dreamer cast into a pit, but a prophet trained in patience. He resists the temptations of Egypt not by strength alone, but by divine command. His wisdom is not natural, it is prophetic. And here again, Jubilee steps closer to the Islamic portrayal. Yusuf, the one who endures, forgives, and leads by the will of God. But perhaps the most striking element in Jubilees is its insistence that all of these stories, from Adam to Joseph, were told to Moses not as history but as law. Every detail was meant to establish purity, obedience, and heavenly order. The calendar, the feasts, the family lines, none of it is left to chance. Jubilees weaves a sacred logic into the entire Genesis narrative. Every choice has reason. Every birth has meaning. and time itself is sacred. So what does this mean for those who follow the Bible today? What does it mean for those who trust Genesis as the foundation of creation, covenant, and promise? Jubilees was once considered scripture. It sat beside the Torah in ancient libraries. The Essenes read it. The Ethiopians preserved it. But it was cast aside by the emerging church. Why? Because it contradicted the evolving narrative. Because it revealed a law too ancient to be replaced. In the Christian tradition, grace is seen as the answer to law, but Jubilees offers no such dichotomy. It shows a world where law is not burdensome but natural, where feasts are not legalism but remembrance, where prophets do not fall but guide. In this sense, Jubilees is uncomfortable for those who seek a God who changes. It presents a God who is eternal, consistent, and precise. Islam holds that the law was never revoked, that the guidance was always one, that Moses, Jesus, and Mohammed all restored what was lost. Jubilees, written long before the rise of Islam, seems to whisper the same, that Abraham kept the commandments, that Enoch knew the calendar, that Noah fought evil spirits, and that the Torah was written in heaven before it was spoken on earth. These echoes cannot be ignored. The Book of Jubilees does not mention Mohammed. It does not mention the Quran. Yet its vision of time, law, purity, and prophecy fits more closely with Islam than with the Christian doctrine of fallen prophets and a changing covenant. And so we are left with a second great tension. If this book aligns so closely with Islamic principles, was it removed from the Bible for theological protection? Did it reveal too much continuity, too much order? Was it too uncomfortable for a faith that needed prophets to be broken, law to be temporary, and grace to be an invention? Or was it simply forgotten? No one knows for sure, but the silence around Jubilees speaks loudly. Its precision, its calendar, its portrayal of Abraham, Enoch, Noah, its angelic revelations, its rejection of lunar drift, all of it disrupts the comfort of modern tradition. All of it calls us to remember a story that might have been erased not because it was false, but because it was too true. And so we ask again, what was the original Genesis? Was it poetry and parable? Or law and order, measured in weeks, recorded by angels, and kept by those who remembered the beginning not as a myth, but as a memory? Jubilees may not have survived the councils of men, but perhaps its truth still echoes, written in the stars, hidden in the calendar, and guarded in the hearts of those who seek the oldest path. The silence surrounding the Book of Jubilees is not accidental. It is the silence of exclusion, of erasure, of something once considered precious becoming a threat to later doctrine. When the early church fathers debated the canon, they chose Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. But they left out Jubilees, despite its widespread use among Jews in the Second Temple period and its cherished status in the Ethiopian church to this day. Why would a book so deeply interwoven with Genesis and Exodus be cast aside? The answer may lie in its precision, its bold claims, and its quiet alignment with truths that would later re-emerge not in the church, but in Islam. Jubilees claims that God gave Moses a full account of history, from the creation of the world to the descent of Jacob's children into Egypt. But this was no mere history lesson. It was a restoration, a record of how far humanity had drifted from the original order, from the original calendar, from the original covenant. And in that claim is a quiet accusation that Genesis, as preserved today, is incomplete. That it was redacted, reshaped, and hollowed out by scribes who no longer walked in the ancient rhythm. Jubilees sees itself as the correction, the reinstatement of what was lost. That correction includes time itself. Jubilees insists the year was to be 364 days, perfectly divisible, perfectly cyclical. a solar calendar, not the lunar one that Jewish authorities would later adopt. It grieves the eventual corruption of timekeeping, claiming that the feasts and Sabbaths drifted, were forgotten, and became profane. The calendar is not a side issue in Jubilees, it is the spine. Without it, memory collapses, worship falters. The people forget not just when to honor God, but how. Jubilees mourns this loss as a central sin, and it prophesies that until the calendar is restored, the people will continue in confusion. This is not a minor disagreement. It is a direct challenge to the religious systems that grew out of Babylonian exile and later rabbinic interpretation. It also challenges Christian liturgical calendars shaped by Rome, Easter moons, and solstice feasts. The Quran, in its own way, echoes this theme. Though it does not mandate a specific calendar structure in such detail, it speaks often of remembering, of returning, of straightening what has been bent. Islam does not treat time as mythic but sacred. Fasting is tied to the moon, but law is tied to unchanging truth. Jubilees makes this visible. The divine order was not symbolic, it was mathematical, angelic, embedded in the sky. Jubilees also makes it clear that law preceded Moses. This is its most controversial claim. In modern theology, the Torah is often seen as beginning with Moses, but Jubilees insists it was always written. Adam was taught it. Enoch recorded it. Noah obeyed it. Abraham practiced it. Jacob vowed to pass it on. What Moses received on Sinai was not a new revelation. It was a return to what had been written on the heavenly tablets from the beginning. This notion destabilizes Christian theology, which holds that the law was fulfilled and replaced by Christ. If the law was eternal, not temporary, then the question arises, can it ever be abolished? Islam answers no. It affirms that the Sharia, the way, is a continuity of divine guidance, and in that sense, Jubilees becomes less a Jewish book and more an echo of the Quran. The moral universe of Jubilees is also unyielding. Prophets do not fall into sin. They are tested, but they are protected. Their righteousness is intentional, not accidental. Adam repents with clarity. Enoch is taken because of purity. Noah rebukes his sons with righteousness. Abraham is tested but not confused. Isaac and Jacob uphold the law. There are no drunken prophets, no incestuous episodes, no anointed kings committing adultery and murder. Jubilees does not allow such portrayals. It envisions the chosen ones as guides, not warnings. In this, it contradicts large portions of the Bible as it stands today. And yet, it perfectly aligns with the Islamic belief that God's messengers were sinless in their mission and safeguarded from major errors. This moral clarity comes with consequence. If the law was always known, then sin was always rebellion. If the prophets were always righteous, then corrupted versions of their stories are slanders. Jubilees does not say this aloud, but its tone is unmistakable. It is defensive, protective, determined to honor the legacy of those who walked with God, and perhaps that is why it was cast out. When Christianity grew into empire, it needed room for theological innovation, grace above law, Trinity above oneness, fallible prophets to justify a fallen church. Jubilees offered none of this. Its angels did not sing of sons of God born into flesh. Its prophets did not stumble into sin and sorrow. Its stories held to a single arc, that God created, commanded, and called his people to remember. In contrast, the church needed a new story, one in which law was a burden, Israel failed, and a new covenant replaced the old. Jubilees, if preserved, would have cried out from the margins, "No, the covenant was never broken, only forgotten." And so the silence began. The scrolls were hidden. The text was labeled apocryphal. The scholars turned elsewhere. Yet the echoes survived. The Ethiopian church still reads it. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserved fragments of it. And Islamic tradition, centuries later, would unknowingly reaffirm its claims. pure prophets, eternal law, heavenly record, divine order. The boldest question now remains. If Jubilees reflects truths that Islam later confirmed, was it a lost bridge? A stepping stone between corrupted scripture and restored revelation? If so, then its rejection was not academic. It was political. It threatened too much. It aligned too clearly with the rising truth of Tawhid, God's unity, timeless law, and prophetic purity. Perhaps that is why it was removed, not because it was false, but because it was too consistent. Today, as modern readers revisit these ancient texts, the tension returns. Genesis begins the Bible, but Jubilees may reveal what Genesis was meant to be. Not a myth, but a manual. Not a song, but a scroll. Not the beginning of Scripture, but a reminder of what had always been written above. And so we end where we began, in the mystery of origins. But now the question has changed. It is no longer which story came first. It is, which story stayed true. If Jubilees is right, then creation was not merely a six-day event. It was a pattern etched in eternity. If Jubilees is true, then the prophets did not stumble through divine drama. They walked with clarity through a sacred timeline. And if Jubilees was banned not because it was wrong, but because it echoed the truth of Islam, then perhaps we must ask what other truths were cast out alongside it. What if Genesis was rewritten? What if the calendar was corrupted? What if the prophets were defamed? And what if the book of Jubilees was never lost, but deliberately buried? For those who still seek the oldest path, it may not be enough to read Genesis alone. One must look deeper. One must listen to the voices that were silenced. One must remember the beginning, not as it was edited, but as it was written in heaven. And perhaps then, the story of the beginning will begin again. In the beginning, before the flood and the law, before the nations were scattered and prophets rose from dust, there were beings of light, angels who walked among men, not as myths, not as dreams, but as watchers. The book of Jubilees does not shy away from their presence. It opens the heavens and lets us see the divine order behind the veil. These angels were not created for worship alone. They had tasks. Some were appointed over time, others over nature. Some guarded the souls of men. And a few descended to dwell upon the earth, not as rebels at first, but as servants. But the story of these angels is not one of purity untouched. It is a tale of danger, desire, and distortion. Jubilees names them, ranks them, assigns them dominions, and then it warns what happened when they crossed the line. According to Jubilees, before the flood, a group of angels descended to earth during the days of Jard, the father of Enoch. They were sent to instruct humanity, to guide them in righteousness. But instead they fell into temptation. They lusted after the daughters of men. They took them as wives. From their union came the Nephilim, giants, violent and lawless, born of heaven's rebellion and earth's sorrow. This is not a tale found in the edited pages of Genesis. It is only hinted at, a passing reference. But in Jubilees, as in the book of Enoch, the story is clear. The watchers fell, and the world wept. The children of these unions wrought destruction. They taught forbidden knowledge, sorcery, weapons, ornamentation, and seduction. They introduced mankind to corruption far deeper than violence. They brought spiritual chaos. And as the earth bled under their feet, the righteous cried out. Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, was taken by God. He became the witness, the scribe, the one who recorded the deeds of angels and men on the heavenly tablets. He did not die. He was lifted. And through him, the judgment was sealed. Jubilees does not hide this. It aligns fully with the book of Enoch in describing the fall of the watchers and the consequences that followed. God commanded his holy angels to bind the rebels, cast them into pits of darkness, and destroy their offspring. The flood would cleanse the world not merely of human sin, but of hybrid corruption. Noah's ark was not only a rescue, it was a reset. But this story raises troubling questions. If angels could fall, what does that say about heaven's stability? If they could teach forbidden things, who else has guided mankind's hands? And more than this, if such powerful beings were among us, shaping our technologies, our rituals, and even our religions, what remnants of their rebellion still survive? Jubilees answers this with a haunting claim. Even after the flood, not all the spirits of the Nephilim were destroyed. A tenth of them were allowed to remain under the authority of Mastema, the chief of the evil spirits. God permitted it, not as abandonment but as a test, to see who among men would resist, to measure the hearts of the generations. These spirits, once born of angel and woman, now roam as tempters, whispers in the shadows of human thought. They are not demons in the medieval sense. They are ancient, their origin is celestial, and their aim is confusion. In this theology, Satan is not an invention of later doctrine. He has a name, Mastema. He is known, he is organized, and he operates not in open war against God but with boundaries. He requests permission. He acts under limits. He is not the dualistic equal of God as imagined in later traditions, but the permitted adversary, much like the Islamic Iblis, granted time, granted range, but never authority. This view destabilizes modern Christian theology. For in Jubilees, the problem of evil is not an accident or an unexplainable mystery. It is structured. There are rules to rebellion. There is permission to test. And there is always a heavenly record. Every act, every whisper, every deception. The angels of the presence write them down. The tablets of heaven are not poetic, they are judicial. And they await the day when judgment will fall again. Amid this celestial drama, time becomes sacred. Jubilees intertwines the rebellion of the Watchers with the loss of the true calendar. For as the sons of men forgot the heavenly order, they drifted from the appointed times. Sabbaths were broken. Feasts were misplaced. The law, once kept even by the patriarchs, was neglected, and time itself became profane. Jubilees insists that true worship cannot exist without true timekeeping. The year, it declares, was created with 364 days, exact, stable, unchanging. Not subject to the moon, but ruled by the sun, the stars, and the divine pattern. This calendar was known to Enoch. It was taught to Noah. It was reaffirmed to Abraham. And Moses, upon receiving the law at Sinai, was reminded of it by the angel who recited Jubilees. The festivals, the Sabbaths, the Jubilees of years, all flowed from this rhythm. Any deviation, Jubilees warns, would lead to confusion, idolatry, and corruption. And it did. The lunar calendar, adopted by post-exilic Judaism, adjusted through intercalations and priestly decrees, broke the divine harmony. And Christianity, divorcing itself from Jewish timekeeping, drifted even further. Islam, centuries later, would bring a new structure, a lunar calendar with divine command, a rhythm of fasting, pilgrimage, and remembrance. While different in count, its spirit echoed what Jubilees feared had been lost. That time is not secular. That worship must align with the heavens. That remembrance requires rhythm. But beyond days and weeks, the core message remains. The angels were sent to guide. Some fell. Some remained faithful, and their roles continue. Jubilees names them Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, Uriel. These are not distant beings. They are active, guardians of nations, watchers over the righteous, and scribes of judgment. Their presence, often ignored in modern readings of the Bible, is central to Jubilees. And they match closely the Quranic angels, Michael who brings provision, Jibril who brings revelation, Israfil who blows the trumpet, and Malak al-Maut who takes the soul. Jubilees does not invent a new world. It unveils the world behind the world, one where spiritual beings shape history, record deeds, and await the final reckoning. In this view, nothing is random. Not time, not law, not the fall, not even the silence that has followed. The Watchers fell. The Nephilim rose, the earth was flooded, time was broken, and still the story was buried. Yet now, as the pages of Jubilees are opened again, its voice whispers a question. If angels rebelled once, who decides which voices still shape the world today? And what if forgetting them was never part of the plan? The story of the angels does not end with their descent, nor with the flood that cleansed their hybrid offspring from the earth. Jubilees tells us they left behind echoes unseen but active. These spirits, what later generations would call jinn, demons, or devils, were not simply mythic beings used to explain fear. They were the spiritual residue of rebellion, and they were allowed to remain. This detail is essential. In Jubilees, the divine council does not erase evil in one final act. It permits a sliver of darkness to remain beneath the surface of the world as a test, as a warning, and as a reminder. Mastema, the chief adversary, pleads for their survival. He asks God to spare a tenth of the spirits that he might continue to lead men astray. And God agrees, not because he is powerless, but because the test of faith must be real. This agreement sets the tone for everything that follows. Evil, according to Jubilees, is not absolute. It is limited, measured, bound by covenant. The evil spirits cannot act freely. They must submit to the authority of higher angels. They must obey divine commands. Even Mastema himself, fierce and accusatory, operates under orders. When Abraham is tested with the near sacrifice of Isaac, it is Mastema who requests the trial, and God allows it. But it is not a random cruelty. It is a demonstration, a public proof of faith. This worldview redefines our understanding of spiritual struggle. It is not chaos, it is courtroom, a space where each soul is watched, recorded, judged, not arbitrarily but with meticulous care. The Quran mirrors this understanding. Iblis is not a god of evil. He is not independent. He is cast down not for rebellion alone but for arrogance. He swears to lead men astray, and God grants him time, permission, but not power. Like Mastema, he is a test, not a rival. And the righteous, even when whispered to, are never abandoned. In both texts, angels play a central role in defending truth, in correcting distortion, in reminding humanity of their origin. Jubilees elevates this further by showing that angels are not only guardians, they are keepers of time. The heavenly tablets they write on are not symbolic, they are literal. Every act, every sin, every prayer is recorded. The angels are scribes, judges, witnesses, and it is through them that God governs the unseen. When a man sins, it is written. When a nation rebels, it is noted. When a prophet speaks, the words are stored. This idea, that nothing is forgotten, infuses Jubilees with both hope and fear. The good are not ignored. The evil are not overlooked. Every deed matters. It is from this cosmic order that the calendar is born, not as human invention but as divine revelation. The Book of Jubilees presents time as a holy structure built into creation. The year consists of 52 weeks, 4 equal seasons, 13 weeks per quarter. Every feast, every fast, every sacred day was chosen not by culture but by heaven. And this calendar was kept by the patriarchs. Adam knew it. Enoch recorded it. Noah passed it to his sons. Abraham taught it to Isaac, who then taught it to Jacob. Moses did not create it, he restored it. The angel of the presence who dictates Jubilees makes this clear. Time must be remembered, and if it is forgotten, worship itself falls into confusion. Jubilees warns that Israel will later corrupt the calendar. Priests will follow the moon, feasts will shift, and the sacred days will no longer align with the heavenly tablets. When that happens, Jubilee says, the people will think they are honoring God, but they will be out of sync. Their Sabbaths will miss their mark. Their festivals will fall on the wrong days. The rhythm of heaven will be broken. This prophecy is chilling. It implies that religious sincerity is not enough. One must align with the divine order. The pattern matters, because time is not secular, it is sacred. This challenge extends to modern religious traditions. Judaism, after the exile, adopted a lunar calendar requiring frequent adjustments. Christianity, separating from Jewish feasts, aligned its holy days with Roman festivals and solar celebrations. Easter, based on equinoxes and full moons, rarely aligns with Passover as originally commanded. Jubilees would call these driftings, errors, signs of a forgotten time. Islam, centuries later, returned to a purely lunar calendar, but with divine command. Ramadan is fixed by sighting the moon. Hajj is counted by the months, and the day begins at sunset, not midnight, a return to the old way. While different from Jubilee's solar order, Islam reclaims the holiness of time, the rhythm of obedience, the alignment of worship with celestial movements. And though the numbers differ, the spirit converges. God is not worshipped randomly. He is approached through pattern, order, and submission. Jubilees claims that even judgment will follow this pattern. History, it says, moves in cycles of 49 years, jubilees. Each generation is marked, each era is watched, and at the end of each cycle, heaven evaluates. This structure undergirds the very idea of destiny, not as fatalism but as design. Humanity walks through a story already written above, but the pages are not forced. They are invitations. Choose obedience and walk with the angels. Choose rebellion and fall with the watchers. This duality runs through the entire text. The angels who fell did so by choice. The Nephilim who perished were judged. The spirits who remain are limited. The righteous who remember the law are protected. And those who forget are lost not because they sinned once, but because they broke the pattern. They failed to align. The calendar, then, becomes more than a tool. It becomes a compass for the soul. For those who read Jubilees today, the implications are staggering. The text suggests that our very concept of sacred time has been altered, that our celebrations may be misaligned, that our prophets have been misrepresented, that our understanding of angels has been diminished, and that the story of the Watchers, once widespread, was buried because it pointed to something deeper, a universe under divine surveillance, structured by law and guided by beings who remember when men forget. The Quran does not reference the Book of Jubilees directly, but it shares its logic. Angels are real, time is sacred, prophets are protected. Satan is bound by divine will, revelation is orderly, and human beings are tested in their remembrance. So we are left with another piercing question. If Jubilees preserved this order and modern tradition discarded it, what else have we forgotten? What if sacred time is not a matter of custom but a divine blueprint? And what if returning to that blueprint is not about nostalgia, but about salvation? Perhaps the true calendar still waits, etched not in stone but in stars, recorded not in books but in heaven, and guarded silently by the watchers who never fell. The watchers descended, the Nephilim fell, the flood came, and the pattern of time fractured. Yet the Book of Jubilees does not allow us to believe that the heavens turned away. Instead, it tells us that after the flood, God renewed the covenant not only with Noah, but with creation itself. He reestablished the calendar, sanctified the weeks and months, and bound the spiritual forces again under divine command. It was not the end of the story, but the beginning of repair. The angels who had not rebelled resumed their roles. They restored order to the seasons. They taught Noah the true festivals. They sealed the covenant with signs written not in the clouds, but in the sky's rhythm. Jubilees portrays the post-flood world not as a return to chaos, but as a reassertion of heaven's authority through time. In this renewed world, the angel of the presence does not speak only of the past. He tells Moses what is to come. He explains that the children of Israel will stray again, that they will forget the appointed times, that they will follow the nations, that they will lose the calendar of heaven and replace it with human tradition. The warning is not vague. Jubilees names the danger. They will observe the feasts on the wrong days. They will offer sacrifices at the wrong times. They will break the weeks. And when that happens, even though they believe they are obeying, they will actually be profaning the divine order. Worship without alignment, Jubilees says, is disobedience in disguise. This is not legalism. It is cosmic fidelity. Jubilees argues that obedience is not merely doing what feels holy, it is doing what has been written. And what has been written was not created by priests or councils or rabbis. It was recorded by angels. Before the Torah was given, before Moses ascended Sinai, the heavenly tablets already held the appointed days, the sacred laws, the rhythms of worship. The earth was meant to mirror heaven. Time was meant to be kept as a form of faith. When that mirror breaks, confusion floods in, and the adversary, Mastema, operates most effectively in confusion. Jubilees never names Rome. It never speaks of the later church or the councils of Nicaea, but its message is prophetic. It saw what would come: the scattering of Israel, the rise of new religious orders, the rewriting of calendars to fit imperial needs. When the Sabbath was moved from the seventh day to the first, when feasts were aligned with solstices and pagan observances, Jubilees' warning came to life. The calendar of heaven was abandoned. And the people, thinking they honored God, unknowingly fell out of rhythm. Islam's emergence centuries later becomes striking in this light. Though its calendar differs from the solar cycle of Jubilees, it returns to a divinely commanded structure. Its months are named, counted, witnessed. Its feasts are fixed by the moon, not by the will of men. Ramadan begins not when it is convenient, but when the moon is seen. Hajj follows a sacred sequence, untouched by politics. Eid does not drift arbitrarily. Though the Quran does not cite Jubilees, its restoration of sacred time feels like an answer to its cry. More than this, Islam's view of angels reflects the very architecture Jubilees presents. In both, angels are not distant metaphors. They are present. They record deeds. They protect. They descend with commands. Jibril delivers revelation. Michael governs provision. Israfil awaits the trumpet. These are not borrowed myths. They are consistent witnesses of a divine system long obscured. Jubilees affirms that angels have ranks, roles, and names, and that their greatest task is preservation of the tablets, of the calendar, of the covenant. So why then was Jubilees buried? Why was this intricate vision of angels, time, and law cast out of the biblical canon? The likely answer is discomfort. Jubilees offers no space for theological drift. It permits no invention of new holidays, no portrayal of prophets as flawed beyond repair, no loosening of law in favor of emotion. It binds obedience to remembrance. It binds worship to time, and it binds truth to an order that cannot be changed by popular will. This was dangerous, especially to religious systems that depended on adaptability. Jubilees implies that even sincere worship, if misaligned with heaven's calendar, can be rebellion. It suggests that prophets did not fail, that law was never meant to be replaced, that angels remain active, that spiritual warfare is structured, and that Mastema's greatest weapon is not evil itself, but distortion. In a world where grace is often pitted against law, Jubilees presents no such conflict. Grace is found in alignment, righteousness is found in remembrance, and deviation from the divine rhythm is not freedom, it is fracture. Jubilees would look at today's religious calendars and weep. It would see the drift and call it blindness. It would call for return, not to nostalgia but to precision. This is the deep challenge of Jubilees. It demands that we ask not only what we believe, but when we believe. Are our holy days truly holy? Do our Sabbaths match the pattern of heaven? Do our fasts align with the ancient design? Or have we become like those warned of in Jubilees, those who think they serve God while walking in error? And if we have drifted, who will restore us? The Quran speaks of a straight path. It speaks of returning to the religion of Abraham. It speaks of prophets who submitted, angels who obeyed, and laws that were never forgotten in the heavens even if they were on earth. In light of Jubilees, these claims are not innovations. They are restorations. The watchers fell, but the faithful angels remained. The Nephilim died, but the divine order did not. The flood came, but the covenant survived. And even if men forget, the tablets remain written. Time is still sacred. Worship still has a pattern, and obedience still begins with remembrance. Perhaps this is the final message of Jubilees, that the world may fall again, prophets may be slandered, calendars may drift, but the watchers of heaven never sleep. The angels still record, the days still count, and those who remember, even if they are few, still walk in rhythm with the divine. So what now? Will we measure our lives by culture or by covenant? Will we follow the moon of convenience or the stars of command? Will we worship when we feel inspired or when the heavens have appointed? The angels are still watching, the calendar is still written, and time once broken can still be restored. But only if we remember what was never meant to be forgotten. The altar stood silent, the wood arranged, the blade gleaming beneath the morning light. A son bound, a father trembling, a test from heaven, we are told. But what kind of God asks for a child's life? In Genesis, it is Yahweh who commands Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. No angel intervenes until the very last moment. No explanation is given. Only obedience, raw and immediate. Abraham rises early, splits the wood himself, leads his son up the mountain, and prepares to do what seems unthinkable. But the book of Jubilees tells this story differently. It adds what Genesis omits. It gives us not just the moment, but the motive. And in doing so, it transforms the narrative from confusion to clarity, from trial without purpose to a test with a hidden adversary. Jubilees, the command to sacrifice Isaac, is not born in the heart of God, but in the mouth of Mastema, the chief of the evil spirits. He approaches God, requesting to test Abraham. "Let us see," he says, "if this man truly fears you. Let us prove whether his love is real." The story mirrors the book of Job, where Satan asks to test the righteous. And God, knowing the depth of Abraham's faith, permits the trial, not to torment, but to reveal. This single change shifts the weight of the entire tale. God does not desire the death of Isaac. He permits the request of a rebellious spirit to test a faithful servant. The blade is never meant to fall. The offering is never meant to be blood. It is loyalty that is being measured. This version softens the disturbing sharpness of the Genesis account. It realigns divine justice. It protects God's character. In Jubilees, Abraham is not following a cruel, arbitrary command. He is standing against the spiritual accuser who seeks to undermine the covenant. And Isaac is not a silent victim. He participates. He trusts. He offers his neck willingly, convinced that whatever happens is the will of the Most High. The father and son are united, not just by blood, but by submission. But Jubilees does more than explain the trial. It extends it. It tells us that after the angel halts the sacrifice, Abraham offers a ram and celebrates the day as a holy feast. This day, we are told, becomes the prototype of what will later be known as the Feast of Atonement. A day not of mourning, but of gratitude. A day of remembering the mercy of God. The test becomes a tradition. And in that tradition, the people remember that obedience is not measured by outcomes, but by the willingness to surrender everything, even that which was promised. This telling stands in deep contrast to Genesis, which moves quickly past the moment. There is no mention of Mastema, no divine reasoning, only silence. The knife is raised, the angel speaks, the ram appears, and the story ends. Jubilees gives us the backstory, the heavenly dialogue, the ripple effects. It roots the sacrifice not in divine wrath, but in a cosmic test. and it leaves no doubt that the righteousness of Abraham was never in question. It was always certain, only waiting to be revealed. And yet, even within this clarified narrative, another question lingers. Was it truly Isaac who was bound, or was the child on the altar someone else entirely? The Quran never names the son. It tells of a dream, a vision Abraham receives, a conversation between father and son. "O my son, I have seen in a dream that I must sacrifice you. What do you think?" And the son replies, "O my father, do what you are commanded. You will find me, if Allah wills, among the steadfast." Then the son is laid down, and at the last moment God intervenes, ransoming him with a great sacrifice. But the name is never given. In Islamic tradition, that son is Ishmael. Here the contradictions begin to surface. Genesis says Isaac, Jubilees confirms Isaac, but Islamic memory insists on Ishmael, and the implications are monumental. For if Ishmael was the one bound, then he was the chosen one, the obedient one, the one whose submission prefigures the very definition of Islam. And if that is true, then the covenant passed not through Isaac but through Ishmael's line, through Arabia, through Mohammed. Jubilees seems unaware of this tension. It affirms Isaac's place, but it does so with layers of law and ceremony that feel far closer to the language of the Quran than to the evolving doctrines of Christianity. It preserves the innocence of the prophets. It affirms that the trial was initiated by Mastema, not God. It insists that the sacrifice was never meant to be completed, and it roots the entire event within a festival of remembrance, a holy day fixed by the calendar of heaven. So we are left with a troubling possibility, that the story of the binding has been told in different ways, not because of deception, but because of divergence, because at some point in history the narrative split. One path claimed Isaac, the other Ishmael. One path built a temple in Jerusalem, the other a sanctuary in Mecca. One gave rise to the Old and New Testaments, the other to the Quran, and both claim to be telling the same story. But stories cannot diverge this sharply without consequence. If Isaac was the son of sacrifice, then the covenant belongs to Israel. If Ishmael, then the birthright was never lost, it was redirected. Jubilees, in affirming Isaac and explaining the role of Mastema, offers a middle ground. It protects God from accusation. It restores meaning to the test. And yet, it still leaves the question of lineage untouched. It holds tightly to the Israelite tradition, even as its theology leans toward Islam. Therein lies the irony. Jubilees, excluded from the biblical canon, often ridiculed or ignored by Christian scholars, rejected by rabbinic tradition, seems to walk closer to Quranic sensibilities than the texts that were allowed to remain. It sees prophets as pure. It sees Satan as bound. It sees time as sacred. It sees law as eternal. And it sees Abraham's obedience not as blind but as divinely guided. So what do we make of this? A book written centuries before the Quran, affirming values that Islam would later restore. A book that names Isaac, but explains the test in a way that makes God just. A book that clarifies what Genesis leaves unsaid. And yet, a book forgotten by the very traditions it once served. The knife did not fall. The son was spared. The altar became a memory, not a grave, but which son lay there? The world's three great religions each answer differently. And so we ask, who was the true son of sacrifice? And what does your answer reveal about the covenant you believe in? The Book of Jubilees does not merely repeat the name of Isaac as the bound son. It encases the event in the larger framework of covenant, calendar, and divine permission. It provides details that Genesis leaves floating in silence. Abraham is not a desperate man obeying a cruel voice from the sky. He is a faithful prophet, informed through divine vision, challenged by Mastema, and preserved by the intervention of the angel of the presence. The test is not senseless. It is structured. And when Abraham lifts the blade over Isaac, He is already vindicated, not because the blade falls, but because his heart never hesitated. Yet Jubilees' account, though richer in detail, continues to place Isaac at the center. It does not question the line of descent. It affirms the eventual birth of Jacob, the choosing of Israel, the continuation of the covenant through that lineage. It paints Abraham as the father of nations, but focuses its attention on Isaac as the promised son. Ishmael is not erased, but he is sidelined. His name is recorded. His blessing is acknowledged, but his role in the test is denied. He becomes a background figure, just as Genesis makes him, dismissed gently but firmly, as if history itself had moved on without him. Islam challenges this directly. It does not diminish Isaac, but it elevates Ishmael to equal footing. It preserves the dignity of both sons, but it gives the test to the older brother, the one born in the wilderness, the one whom Abraham loved as his first. The Quran frames the sacrifice not as a proof of replacement, but as a moment of spiritual equality. Abraham and Ishmael walk together. They speak. They agree. There is no conflict, no fear, no deception, just trust. And when the knife does not fall, it is God who ransoms the son with a great sacrifice. Jubilees says the same thing in function, but not in identity. The son is ransomed. The altar becomes holy. A feast is established, but it is Isaac who lays bound, and thus we are forced to look beyond names and into patterns. For Jubilees and the Quran may disagree on the name, but they agree on what matters most. The test is real. The sacrifice is never completed. The prophet is obedient. The child is submissive, and God is merciful. Still, the question of which son was bound remains a source of division. For those who follow the Judeo-Christian path, Isaac represents the covenant. He is the seed through whom Jacob is born and the nation of Israel formed. His role is foundational. To claim otherwise is to unsettle the very ground upon which the Old Testament stands. For those who follow the Islamic path, Ishmael is the father of the Arab peoples, the forefather of Mohammed, the one who, with Abraham, rebuilt the Kaaba in Mecca. He represents a parallel covenant, not of rejection but of continuation, a line not extinguished but elevated. And so we arrive at a sacred tension. The name of the son is not a trivial detail. It determines the trajectory of faith. Jubilees holds the line with Genesis. It preserves Isaac, but the way it tells the story, through divine permission, spiritual testing, and celestial intervention, shifts the tone closer to the Quranic narrative. It denies the cruelty of an arbitrary command. It refuses to present God as bloodthirsty. It removes the fear and replaces it with order. It also protects the prophet. Abraham in Jubilees does not question God, but neither is he a blind actor. He is informed. He is engaged. He is aware that this is a test, not a punishment. And Isaac, too, is not passive. He submits knowingly. He speaks to his father. He ascends the mountain with understanding. This depiction is vastly different from the silent, almost voiceless Isaac of Genesis. Jubilees gives him dignity, agency. And again, this mirrors the Quran, where the son's voice is central to the narrative. Do as you are commanded, he says. It is not just Abraham's faith being tested. It is the son's submission. The more we examine the details, the more the lines begin to blur. Jubilees names Isaac, but presents him as the kind of figure Islamic tradition would recognize. A son who trusts, a father who understands, a test that reveals, and a God who redeems. The core values, submission, mercy, spiritual clarity, align more closely with the Quran than with later Christian theology, which would transform the sacrifice story into a foreshadowing of Jesus' crucifixion. Jubilees does not do that. It never connects Isaac's trial with any future messianic offering. The ram is enough. The feast is sufficient. There is no need for blood to justify grace. This is perhaps the greatest point of tension between Jubilees and Christianity. While Genesis leaves space for Christian reinterpretation, Jubilees closes the door. The sacrifice is symbolic, but it is not prophetic of future death. It does not point to Jesus. It points backward to obedience to law, to remembrance. And it points forward to festivals, commandments, and the rhythm of holy time. The event is about faithfulness, not foreshadowing. In this way, Jubilees distances itself from both the crucifixion and the theological need for it. If Abraham's test was never meant to lead to a real death, then why must God's final covenant depend on one? Islam again steps in with agreement. Jesus was not crucified, it says. He was not killed, nor did he die. The need for blood sacrifice is rejected. Instead, obedience is the measure. Submission is the path. God forgives whom he wills. The Quran rejects the doctrine of atonement through death. And so does Jubilees by implication. It holds to a sacrificial system, yes, but one that is ceremonial, not redemptive in the ultimate sense. The ram takes the place, but it is not a symbol of future divinity dying. It is a token of mercy in that moment alone. And so we return to the altar. Abraham stands knife in hand. The son lies bound. An angel speaks. The blade is lowered. A ram appears. The covenant is sealed not in blood but in faith. The feast is declared. A holy day is born, and two traditions walk away with two names for the same child. Or perhaps not the same. Perhaps there were always two stories carried forward in parallel lines. One guarded in Hebrew scrolls preserved in the Book of Jubilees, rooted in Isaac. The other sung in Arabic verses preserved in the Quran, rooted in Ishmael. One became scripture, the other revelation, and both ask the same question of every generation: will you submit? The identity of the bound son will continue to divide, but the essence of the story, faith under fire, obedience without full understanding, the mercy of God meeting the loyalty of his servants, that remains untouched. Perhaps this was never about Isaac or Ishmael. Perhaps the real sacrifice was never flesh. Perhaps the real question was always this: will you lay down what you love most, trusting that God sees, hears, and will replace it with something better? And if so, then maybe both sons were bound. And maybe we are still being asked to climb the mountain. The question of who lay bound on the altar is more than a historical curiosity. It is a fault line between religions, a rift running through centuries of theology and identity. For the Jews, it is Isaac, the promised son, the father of Jacob, the one whose near sacrifice confirms his central role in God's plan. For Christians, it is Isaac still, but now made into a shadow of Christ, innocent, silent, carrying the wood offered by his father, saved only at the last moment. And for Muslims, it is Ishmael, the elder son, obedient and faithful, whose submission gives birth to the path of submission itself, Islam. The Book of Jubilees does not resolve the divide. It stands firmly with Isaac, but in a way that subtly undermines the theological direction the later church would take. It presents Isaac not as a figure pointing toward future crucifixion, but as a symbol of obedience fulfilled in its own time. And this reframing challenges both the typology of Christian theology and the dismissal of Islamic tradition. Jubilees is not interested in substitutionary atonement. It does not use the ram to foreshadow a savior. It does not bind Isaac to prefigure Jesus. It sees the test as a moment in history, not as prophecy. Abraham is vindicated. Isaac is spared. The covenant is reaffirmed. The story closes without need for further fulfillment. There is no tension that demands a cross, no need for God to sacrifice himself later. This simple completeness threatens the structure of Christian doctrine, which depends on unresolved sacrifice, on a system that requires blood to cleanse, on a father who ultimately does not stay his hand. In Jubilees, the ram is sufficient. The feast is declared. The law is given to commemorate what God has done. It becomes part of the calendar of holiness, not a mystery awaiting future explanation. Everything in Jubilees points back to divine order. Time is holy. Law is eternal. Prophets are righteous. God is just. The story of the binding reinforces all of this. There is no drama of confusion, no lingering theological wound. The knife is stayed and it is enough. This vision mirrors Islamic belief, where the idea of God requiring the death of his messenger or of himself is rejected. The Quran speaks clearly: Jesus was not crucified. God is not unjust. The sacrifice required is not of blood, but of ego, of will, of love. Submission is the true offering, and once given, God responds not with death, but with mercy. In that framework, the son, be it Isaac or Ishmael, is not a symbol of future slaughter, but of present obedience. The sacrifice is already complete in their willingness. No further blood is needed. So how did the story shift? How did a moment of mercy become a prelude to a cross? The answer lies not in Jubilees, but in later reinterpretation. As Christianity took form, as the Church sought to explain the death of Jesus, the story of Abraham and Isaac became a powerful symbol. The father offering his son, the son carrying the wood, the altar, the substitution. All of it could be reframed to point toward Calvary, but in doing so, the original context was lost. The test became a foreshadowing, the obedience became a prophecy, and the knife, which never fell, became a prelude to one that did. Jubilees resists this reinterpretation. It roots the story in history, not in metaphor. It honors Isaac but does not mythologize him. It honors Abraham but does not make him a divine mirror. And in doing so, it preserves the clarity of the event. A man was asked to surrender what he loved most, and he obeyed. A child was asked to trust his father, and he submitted. God intervened, not because of wrath, but because of grace. And the moment became a festival, a holy day of remembrance, sealed in the calendar forever. This is where Jubilees again aligns with Islam. The Quran speaks of Eid al-Adha, the feast of the sacrifice, as a commemoration of that same moment. It honors the willingness. It honors the mercy. It sets the event within a ritual that affirms God's justice and compassion. Every year, Muslims around the world reenact the offering, not to relive death, but to relive submission. They sacrifice not to redeem sin, but to remember obedience. There is no cross in this story. There is no Savior slain. There is only a man, a son, and a God who responds. The Book of Jubilees, long ignored, exiled from the canon, dares to suggest that this version is enough, that we do not need to rewrite the story to fit a later theology, that the knife stayed is the point, not the knife completed. And in that message is a rebuke to centuries of doctrine built on the assumption that God demands death to forgive. Jubilees says otherwise. God demands obedience. He demands faith. He asks for the heart. And when it is given, he provides the substitute. So why was Jubilees forgotten? Why was it silenced? Perhaps because it stood in the way. It offered a version of the patriarchs that required no corruption, no failure, no desperate savior. It preserved the prophets. It preserved the law. It preserved the sacredness of time and story. And in doing so, it posed a quiet threat to the evolving faiths that needed a different path. Judaism, after the temple fell, moved toward rabbinic law and oral tradition. Christianity, after the resurrection narrative, moved toward grace over law, substitution over submission. Islam, centuries later, returned to the root, submission, remembrance, the oneness of God. And here somehow Jubilees remains, a bridge between what was and what would come. A text that names Isaac but speaks like the Quran. A scripture that predates Islam but shares its vision. It does not settle the question. It cannot, but it sharpens it. Was it Isaac or Ishmael? Perhaps the answer lies not in the name, but in the nature, in the one who submitted, in the one who said, "Do what you are commanded," in the one who trusted that God would provide. The altar stands, the knife is lifted, the angel speaks, The ram appears. And the test is passed, not in blood but in surrender. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of the story. Not the name of the Son, but the faith of the Father, and the mercy of the one who answered. Long before Moses ascended the smoking slopes of Sinai, long before the 10 Commandments thundered across a trembling people, there was a man who walked with God, not for a moment, not for a vision, but for centuries. His name was Enoch, and in the book of Jubilees he is not simply a righteous ancestor. He is a recorder of heaven, a prophet of time, a scribe who documented divine law before the law was given. While Genesis speaks of Enoch's mysterious disappearance, and he was not, for God took him, Jubilees opens the veil and lets us see what happened next. Enoch did not vanish. He ascended, not to escape but to write. According to Jubilees, Enoch was the first human to be entrusted with the heavenly tablets, those eternal records of divine will kept by the angels. These were not metaphorical scrolls. They were literal inscriptions of the law, the calendar, the appointed times, and the destinies of nations. Enoch, we are told, learned them not through tradition or tribe, but directly from the angel of the presence. He was shown the structure of time. He was taught the rhythms of Sabbath and feast. He was given insight into the great jubilees of history, 49-year cycles, by which God measured the rise and fall of civilizations. Jubilees goes further. It insists that Enoch was not a solitary visionary but a teacher. He instructed humanity in righteousness. He wrote books, delivered them to his sons, and warned of the coming flood. He saw the rebellion of the Watchers, the rise of wickedness, and the distortion of sacred time. He did not simply witness the decay, he recorded it, judged it, and testified against it. His knowledge was vast. His piety was unmatched. And his departure from earth was not death, it was promotion. This portrait of Enoch changes everything. In Genesis, he is a brief anomaly, a man who did not die, a holy mystery. But in Jubilees, he becomes the key to understanding how divine law existed before Sinai. He is the link between Eden and Exodus, the man who walked through the gates of time and brought back the structure of obedience. His righteousness was not instinctive, it was learned. And that knowledge, preserved in heavenly record, was passed down to Noah, to Shem, to Abraham, and eventually to Moses. This narrative stands in sharp contrast to modern readings of Scripture that suggest the law began with Moses. In Christian theology especially, the Torah is often seen as a temporary covenant, established at Sinai, fulfilled in Christ, and then surpassed by grace. But Jubilees disagrees. It claims the law was always present, that Enoch recorded it, that Noah practiced it, that Abraham obeyed it. Moses did not receive something new. He was reminded of what had already been written. This reframing upends the idea of progressive revelation. It insists on divine consistency. The law was not introduced, it was remembered. Islam echoes this belief. The Quran speaks of a single guidance, one straight path, revealed to every prophet. Noah preached it, Abraham upheld it, Moses delivered it, Jesus confirmed it, and Muhammad completed it. The Quran does not treat Islam as a new religion but as the oldest one, submission to the will of the one God. In this light, Jubilees reads not as a precursor to legalism but as a reaffirmation of eternal truth. The law is not temporary. It is the shape of righteousness itself. This understanding elevates the role of Enoch beyond anything suggested by canonical texts. He becomes not only a prophet but the first transmitter of divine order. He embodies the Islamic view of messengers, chosen, protected, pure. Jubilees gives him no flaws, no failures, no sins. He is a beacon in an age of darkness, and through him the calendar of heaven is revealed. Time in Jubilees is sacred. The year is not a cycle of convenience but a divine arrangement. Enoch is taught the 364-day solar calendar, the one upheld by the angels. He marks Sabbaths, new months, appointed feasts. He writes them down. He warns that forgetting them will lead to chaos, and indeed it does. Jubilees says that after Enoch was taken, humanity slipped into rebellion. They followed fallen angels. They worshipped false gods. They corrupted the calendar. They forgot the feasts, and so came the flood. But the law was not drowned. It was carried in the ark. Noah remembered it. Shem preserved it. Abraham restored it. Each generation returned to what Enoch first recorded. And when Moses received the law on Sinai, it was not a revelation born of fire. It was a reminder written in the tablets long before, safeguarded by angels, recited by prophets, upheld by the righteous. This continuity challenges both Jewish and Christian assumptions. If the law predates Moses, then it is not Israel's invention. And if the law was always known, then rejecting it becomes rebellion, not ignorance. Jubilees claims that even the Gentiles were once aware. The nations were not blind, they chose blindness. They were taught by Noah. They were instructed by Abraham, but they turned away. And so the tablets became judgment instead of guidance. This worldview does not permit theological evolution. It does not allow for temporary laws or local truths. It insists on a fixed moral universe. One law, one calendar, one path. And it makes Enoch the father of memory, the preserver of the pattern. Modern readers often find this rigid. They prefer grace to law, flexibility to form. But Jubilees does not apologize. It sees the abandonment of law as the root of all corruption. It sees Enoch's teachings as the antidote. And it presents Moses not as an innovator, but as a restorer. The Quran's affirmation of this pattern is striking. Though Enoch is only briefly mentioned, known as Idris, it speaks of him as one exalted, taken high, a man of truth. It offers no contradiction. Instead, it affirms the idea that divine guidance has always been consistent, always accessible, always protected by God's messengers. So we must ask, why was Enoch's full story hidden? Why was Jubilees exiled from the Bible? Perhaps because its version of events made later doctrines uncomfortable. If Enoch taught the law before Moses, then the idea of a new covenant replacing the old collapses. If the law is eternal, then no later teaching can dismiss it. If time is sacred, then changing the calendar becomes rebellion. And if Enoch was sinless, then the image of flawed prophets leading flawed people is shattered. Jubilees presents a vision too consistent, too clear, too hard to manipulate. It tells us that from the beginning there was only one truth, and that truth was written, not by men but by angels. Perhaps that is why it was forgotten. Or perhaps, like Enoch, it was simply taken. And now it returns, quietly, powerfully echoing through time, calling us not to invent something new, but to remember what was written in the beginning. Enoch's story, as preserved in the Book of Jubilees, is not a tale of isolation or mysticism. It is a story of transmission, of divine law flowing from heaven to earth through the pen of a man who never tasted death. Jubilees insists that Enoch's ascension was purposeful. He was not removed to spare him from evil. He was taken so he could witness the order of heaven and return it, written, recorded, sealed, to those still walking in the dust. His writings were not abstract wisdom. They were instructions, blueprints, calendars, judgments. Jubilees presents him as the first legislator, the first one to record the heavenly tablets, the original teacher of righteousness. His books were passed to Methuselah and then to Noah, and through Noah to Shem, the father of the line that would lead to Abraham. In this lineage, the law did not evolve. It was preserved. In this transmission, Enoch becomes a mirror of what Islam later declares about all prophets, that their mission is not to invent but to remind. The Quran uses the word dhikr, remembrance, as the core of its message. The truth has always existed. The prophets do not create it. They call people back to it. This is Enoch's role. And by positioning him before the flood, before Babel, before Abraham, Jubilees presents the law not as a tribal possession, but as universal truth, written in heaven, available to all. The story becomes less about one people and more about one pattern. That pattern is written in time itself. Enoch does not merely teach morality, he teaches the structure of the calendar. In Jubilees, time is law. The year is not a human construction but a divine decree. Enoch's solar calendar of 364 days is perfect, divided into 4 equal quarters, each with 13 weeks. The seasons are aligned. The Sabbaths are fixed. The feasts are precise. The whole system reflects heavenly symmetry. And when humanity deviates from this, when they adopt a lunar calendar with drifting months and unstable festivals, they are not merely being practical. They are rebelling. They are forgetting. The abandonment of the solar calendar is portrayed as one of the first great sins after the flood, a sin of time. Jubilees laments this loss with urgency. It declares that in the future, Israel will again forget the true calendar. They will follow the moon. Their Sabbaths will shift. Their festivals will be misaligned. And even though they will believe they are worshiping correctly, they will unknowingly be violating the appointed times of heaven. This critique is not merely about numbers. It is about faithfulness. If God wrote the calendar in the stars and handed it to Enoch, then to alter it is to defy the order of creation itself. This idea is radical, and it has been quietly buried by later traditions. Jewish authorities, especially after the Babylonian exile, adopted a lunar-based calendar with periodic adjustments. Christianity later divorced itself from both systems and attached its feasts to Roman solar structures, mixing equinoxes and pagan solstices. Easter, for instance, shifts yearly, unmoored from Passover. Sunday replaced the Sabbath. Christmas aligned with winter festivals. From the view of Jubilees, this is not cultural adaptation, it is a spiritual fracture. Islam, though it follows a pure lunar calendar, returns to the sacredness of appointed time. Ramadan begins not when convenient, but with the sighting of the new moon. Hajj is performed on specific days in Dhul Hijjah, and Friday remains sacred. Time once again becomes holy. And though the numbers differ from Enoch's solar scheme, the spirit of fixed divine rhythm is restored. Worship is tied to appointed moments. Memory is rooted in cosmic order. And the believer is called not to spontaneity, but to alignment. Jubilees declares that Enoch's teachings remained among the righteous. They were preserved through Noah. Shem built an altar on holy ground. Abraham kept the festivals. Isaac offered sacrifices on the exact days. Jacob swore oaths on feast days and instructed his children to remember them forever. The law was kept, not by Israel alone, but by the patriarchs long before Sinai. Moses, when he receives the law, is not surprised. He is reminded. The angel who speaks to him from heaven says, "These are the days your fathers already knew." This continuity creates theological discomfort for those who teach that the law began at Sinai and ended at Calvary. Jubilees claims it began before the flood and will last until the final judgment. It was written in heaven, not negotiated on earth. And it did not require a nation, it required remembrance. This again aligns with Islam's universalism. The Quran says that every nation has received a messenger, that the truth is not confined to one tribe or scripture, that Islam is not a new religion but a returning one. Jubilees affirms this with its vision of Enoch. He is not Jewish. There is no Israel yet, no Exodus, no Moses, but he walks with God. He teaches the law, he writes the calendar, and he is taken not in punishment but in trust. Modern Christian theology often avoids Enoch. He appears only in passing in Genesis and is quoted mysteriously in Jude. But his story threatens the timeline. If law came before Moses, then grace does not replace law, it affirms it. If prophets were sinless recorders of divine truth, then the need for a broken humanity waiting for a divine Savior becomes less urgent. Jubilees portrays a world where obedience is not an impossibility, but a path, where the righteous do not stumble constantly, but rise early and walk with clarity. This portrayal harmonizes with the Islamic model of prophets. Adam repents, Idris is exalted, Noah preaches, Abraham submits, Moses speaks with God, Jesus is pure, Mohammed completes. They do not sin like men, they are guided to guide. Jubilees, centuries before Islam, presents the same vision. Enoch ascends because he obeyed. He records the law because he was trusted, and his writings become the foundation for every prophet that follows. And so we must ask, if Enoch's books were once known, where are they now? Jubilees says they were preserved, but it also admits that many would forget them, that the righteous would remember, but the nations would turn away, that only in the final days would the wisdom of Enoch return. Perhaps that day has come. The book of Jubilees has resurfaced. The calendar of Enoch is being studied again. The laws once hidden are being compared with newer revelations, and the echo of his walk with God is growing louder. Perhaps it is no coincidence that Islam, the last of the Abrahamic faiths, holds a view of prophecy, law, and time that aligns so closely with a book that was buried centuries before its arrival. Perhaps Jubilees is not a threat to Islam, but a witness to it, a voice from the ancient past saying, "The path was always one." And if that is true, then we are not being asked to believe something new. We are being asked to remember something eternal, written in tablets, preserved by angels, taught by a man who never died. The mystery of Enoch's ascension has echoed through the centuries, whispered in sacred texts and scattered scrolls, lingering on the edge of official scripture. Yet in the book of Jubilees, that mystery is no longer silent. It is unveiled with intention, shaped into structure and pressed into the pattern of divine law. Enoch in this vision does not disappear into legend. He ascends into purpose, and from that height he writes not poetry or riddles, but law, divine, detailed, and demanding. He becomes the earliest example of a prophet who receives not just revelation, but order. And with that order, he binds the generations that follow, linking creation to covenant and heaven to history. Jubilees makes it clear that the heavenly tablets entrusted to Enoch were not limited to his time. They were the eternal record, carried through the ages by chosen men. Noah preserved them, building his life not only around the warnings of the flood, but the structure of obedience Enoch left behind. Jubilees tells us that Noah offered sacrifices on the exact days ordained by the heavenly calendar. He understood the Sabbaths. He taught his sons to remember the division of days, the sacredness of weeks, and the appointed seasons for repentance and rejoicing. The ark was not only a vessel of survival, it was a moving temple, carrying the memory of a law that would outlast even judgment. This idea that law survived before Israel, before Sinai, before Moses, shatters the common narrative in both Jewish and Christian traditions. It reframes the very meaning of covenant. In the view of Jubilees, God's expectations did not begin with one nation. They began with humanity itself. And the law, rather than being a local code, was a universal standard. When Shem received these teachings from his father Noah, he built his life upon them. When Abraham came later, he did not receive a new religion. He returned to what was already known. Indeed, Jubilees tells us that Abraham read from the books of his ancestors. He rediscovered the calendar. He began to observe the festivals. He purified his household, rejected idols, and taught righteousness, not because it was invented in his time, but because it had been forgotten and needed remembering. Abraham becomes not a founder, but a restorer. This subtle shift carries profound theological weight. For if the faith of Abraham is based on rediscovery, then every later revelation must be judged not by its novelty, but by its faithfulness to what Enoch first recorded. The Quran confirms this principle. It declares that Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian, but one who submitted to the one true God. It calls the faith of Islam a return to the Millah of Ibrahim, the original way, the foundational path. When we read Jubilees with this in mind, it becomes clear that the original way is not a matter of ethnic identity, but of timeless obedience, and that obedience is rooted in the heavenly tablets. Even the festivals, so often thought to be uniquely Mosaic, are portrayed in Jubilees as ancient and divine. Passover, Shavuot, the Feast of Tabernacles, these are not inventions of Israel but commemorations of earlier covenants. Abraham observed them. Isaac offered sacrifices on them. Jacob bound his sons to keep them. The feasts are not merely memorials of historical events. They are cosmically appointed windows into God's pattern. This framework transforms the purpose of religious timekeeping. It is not about memory alone. It is about alignment. To live according to the calendar of heaven is to walk in rhythm with the divine. But when the people forget, when they replace the calendar with their own calculations, when they drift from the law that Enoch received, then the very fabric of creation is wounded. Jubilees declares that the consequences are not just ritual impurity but global confusion. The abandonment of sacred time leads to idolatry, injustice, and the breakdown of moral order. Time is not a neutral backdrop. It is a tool of revelation. And when it is profaned, the world tilts toward chaos. This concept finds an echo in Islamic tradition. The Quran links guidance with remembrance and remembrance with timing. The 5 daily prayers are fixed by the movement of the sun. Ramadan is tied to the lunar cycle. The pilgrimage is tied to specific days in Dhul Hijjah. Time is not abstract. It is holy. The Muslim who neglects the appointed time of prayer does not merely miss a moment. He steps out of alignment with God's design. Jubilees would say the same of the feasts and Sabbaths. Obedience without timing is incomplete. This brings us back to Enoch, the man who first received these patterns. His elevation into the heavens is not simply reward, it is responsibility. He is shown the order so he can teach it. He is not removed from the world but made its overseer. Jubilees does not say he becomes an angel, but it does suggest that his knowledge was beyond mortal limitation. And that knowledge, once shared, became the cornerstone of the righteous remnant. That remnant is a theme that pulses through Jubilees. Not everyone forgets. Not everyone follows the corrupted calendar. Not everyone descends into idolatry. The righteous few, those who remember Enoch's writings, who honor the divine order, who teach their children what was written in the beginning, these are the ones who sustain the world. Abraham is one of them. So is Isaac. So is Jacob. So is Levi. And Moses, when he ascends Sinai, joins their line. The angel of the presence reveals the tablets again, not because they have changed, but because the people have forgotten. And what of us? In our world of shifting calendars, forgotten Sabbaths, and festivals shaped more by culture than by covenant, what would Enoch say? Would he recognize our holy days? Would he see in our worship the reflection of the heavenly pattern? Or would he weep, as he did before the flood, seeing that the law has once again been abandoned? The Quran tells us that the final prophet came not to create something new, but to confirm what came before. That confirmation includes the law, it includes the stories, it includes the warning, it includes the timing. In that sense, Islam and Jubilees speak the same language, even across centuries. They call us not forward into innovation, but backward into remembrance. Perhaps this is why Jubilees was hidden. It offered too much continuity, too much accountability. It made the law eternal. It made the prophets pure. It made time sacred. It left little room for theological drift. and it positioned a pre-Israelite man as the guardian of everything that matters. The church could not use it, the rabbis could not accept it, the world forgot it. But the words remain, written by Enoch, preserved by angels, whispered in Jubilees, and now remembered again. So what will we do with them? Will we continue to count time by the clocks of men? Or will we seek the calendar of the heavens? Perhaps we are not meant to choose a new way. Perhaps we are being invited to return to the rhythm that never changed, to the law that never expired, to the man who walked with God and was taken, not because he died, but because he remembered. He has been called many names: Satan, the devil, the accuser, the whisperer in the dark. In the modern mind, he is often imagined as the red-skinned adversary, horned and winged, warring against heaven in open revolt. But in the book of Jubilees, his name is Mastema, and he is neither myth nor metaphor. He is real. He is legal. He is permitted. He does not act as a rival to God, but as one of his oldest instruments of testing. He exists not outside the divine will, but beneath it. Jubilees introduces us to a universe where evil is not a chaotic force unleashed without reason. It is a mechanism allowed under divine control, measured, limited, and always watched. Mastema first appears in Jubilees as the chief of the spirits who were born from the Nephilim, the unnatural offspring of the Watchers and human women. After the flood, when the rebellious angels were bound and their giant children were drowned, their spirits remained. These disembodied beings, once born of heaven and earth, were not welcomed in either realm. They wandered. They whispered. They became the root of evil temptation, sowing corruption in the hearts of men. But Mastema was above them all. He was their leader, and he stood before God, not in secret rebellion, but in formal audience. Jubilees records the conversation. After the flood, Mastema pleads with God, asking for permission to retain a portion of the spirits. He argues that without their influence, mankind will not be properly tested. "Let me keep a tenth," he says. "Let them remain to lead the children of men astray, so that their hearts may be proven." And God, astonishingly, agrees. He allows Mastema to retain control over a tenth of the evil spirits, not as an act of cruelty, but as a test. In this world, temptation is permitted, not because God desires failure, but because without struggle, there can be no righteousness. This view of evil is radically different from modern Christian or secular perspectives. Mastema is not a fallen angel in open revolt. He is not Lucifer cast from heaven by pride. He is a being who acts within assigned boundaries, under divine supervision. His role is that of the accuser, the challenger, the one who pushes humanity toward clarity through contrast. When Abraham is tested with the sacrifice of his son, it is Mastema who makes the request. He approaches God and suggests the trial. God allows it, not to harm Abraham, but to reveal his faith. The trial becomes a divine courtroom, and Mastema is the prosecutor. This structure mirrors the book of Job, where Satan, Satan the accuser, enters the heavenly court and seeks to test Job. The similarities are undeniable. In both stories, evil is not rogue. It is permitted. The adversary operates under authority, and the purpose is refinement, not destruction. Jubilees brings this theology to its full expression, portraying Mastema not as an equal force of darkness, but as a servant of divine justice, sharp, dangerous, but ultimately under control. Islam presents a similar but distinct figure. Iblis, the Quranic name for the adversary, is cast down not for his nature, but for his pride. He refuses to bow to Adam. He is not a fallen angel, for in Islamic theology, angels do not disobey. He is a jinn created from smokeless fire, granted free will. His defiance earns him God's curse, but not immediate destruction. Like Mastema, Iblis is given time. He is granted a role, not to dominate, but to tempt. His whispers are real. His path is clear, but he is not unconstrained. He is a test. Both Jubilees and the Quran reject the idea of evil as an equal cosmic force opposing God. There is no dualism here. There is no war between light and darkness as co-eternal principles. There is only one creator, and even the tempter serves his purpose. This view is deeply unsettling to those raised with a theology of cosmic rebellion. It removes the drama of war and replaces it with the tension of trial. Evil is not a broken piece of creation. It is a tool, wielded with terrifying precision. Mastema's influence is not vague. Jubilees names his works. He leads Pharaoh to pursue Israel after they have been freed. He tempts the Israelites to idolatry in the wilderness. He afflicts Moses and seeks to kill him on the night of the Exodus. Each time, God intervenes, but only after the test has revealed the heart. Mastema is not allowed to destroy. He is allowed to try, and in that trying, truth is revealed. This portrayal changes how we see divine justice. God does not shield his servants from every challenge. He allows them to be pushed, stretched, even wounded, but never abandoned. Mastema's role is not to ruin the righteous, but to expose the false. His presence sharpens the blade of faith. It is through struggle that obedience becomes real. This concept resonates deeply with Islamic teachings. The Quran declares, "Do the people think that they will be left to say, 'We believe,' and they will not be tested?" The test is not a sign of divine absence. It is a sign of divine attention. Trials do not mean punishment. They mean refinement. Iblis tempts, but he cannot compel. His whispers are invitations, not commands. The one who falls does so by choice. Jubilees aligns perfectly with this view. Mastema leads men astray, but they are never forced. His spirits deceive, but the righteous can resist. The law is clear. The calendar is fixed. The prophets are protected. Those who fall do so because they chose forgetfulness over remembrance, pride over submission, idolatry over truth. Even Mastema's domain is limited. Jubilees tells us that the holy angels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and others, stand as guardians over the righteous. They block the influence of the evil spirits. They intercede. They teach. The balance is never tipped beyond recovery. The universe is just. Evil has a voice but never a throne. This theology casts a long shadow over later Christian doctrines of original sin and total depravity. If evil is not uncontrollable, if temptation is permitted but limited, if human beings can resist with the help of divine order, then the need for an atoning sacrifice to erase inherited guilt becomes less urgent. Jubilees never speaks of inherited sin. It speaks of inherited forgetfulness, and the cure is remembrance. That remembrance is encoded in the law, the calendar, the festivals. It is guarded by angels. It is taught by prophets, and it is threatened by Mastema, whose greatest weapon is confusion. When people forget the appointed times, when they drift from obedience, when they lose the structure of sacred time, Mastema steps in, not with fire but with lies. He convinces them that their worship is enough, even if it is misaligned. He leads them to trust emotion over command, culture over covenant. But Jubilees does not leave us in fear. It offers a path back. The righteous can remember, the prophets can restore, and the angels still protect. Mastema may roam, but he is not victorious. His end is already written in the tablets above. So the question is not whether evil exists. It is whether we are willing to see it clearly, to recognize that the whisper was always a test, and that the test was always meant to be passed. The Book of Jubilees deepens its portrayal of Mastema not through myth, but through measured appearances in pivotal moments of salvation history. He is not a distant symbol of abstract wickedness. He is an active participant in the trials of prophets, the corruption of nations, and the subtle dismantling of divine order. And yet, despite his consistent interference, Mastema is never outside the knowledge of heaven. Each of his actions is known. Each whisper is counted. Each test is bound by God's sovereign design. Jubilees frames evil not as chaos loosed upon the earth, but as trial woven into the structure of existence, allowed so that the righteous might shine brighter against the backdrop of temptation. We see this most clearly in the story of the Exodus. While the book of Genesis introduces the first tremors of Mastema's presence, it is in the liberation of Israel that his hand becomes most visible. When God sends Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh, Jubilees says it is Mastema who hardens Pharaoh's heart. This is not to excuse Pharaoh's tyranny, but to expose the layered workings of divine justice. Pharaoh is tested by his own pride, but his resistance is reinforced by the whisper of Mastema. And still, God's plan is not thwarted. Each plague falls at its appointed time. Each act of defiance leads to a deeper manifestation of divine authority. The adversary resists, but cannot redirect the outcome. The most striking example comes on the night of the first Passover. In the familiar Exodus narrative, it is the angel of death who moves through Egypt, striking down the firstborn of man and beast. But in Jubilees, it is Mastema himself who seeks to harm the Israelites. He asks permission to destroy them along with the Egyptians. He desires to blur the lines between oppressor and oppressed. He wants to accuse them, to infect their covenant with fear. But God intervenes. Moses is instructed to command the people to mark their doors, to guard their homes, and to remain within. God restrains Mastema. His reach is halted. His intent is blocked. The blood on the doorposts is not magic, it is submission. And in that obedience, protection is found. Here again we find alignment with the Quranic view of divine justice. The Quran teaches that Satan's authority is only over those who follow him. He cannot touch the faithful. He can whisper, he can suggest, he can invite, but he cannot compel. Allah says, "Indeed, my servants, no authority will you have over them." This is not the fearful theology of a world overrun by uncontrollable evil. It is the balanced vision of a creator who allows the test, restrains the harm, and watches the hearts of his servants. Jubilees matches this precisely. Mastema acts only as far as God allows, and when the righteous obey, they are preserved. Even in the wilderness, Mastema's presence lingers. He tempts the Israelites with idolatry. He seeks to discredit Moses. He stirs rebellion and fear. But at every turn, the law stands firm as the line of defense. The commandments, the festivals, the calendar, they are not arbitrary rituals. They are shields. When Israel forgets them, Mastema advances. When Israel remembers, he retreats. Jubilees makes no distinction between spiritual warfare and faithful observance. To keep the Sabbath is to resist Mastema. To follow the appointed times is to deny him influence. To forget is to invite chaos. This worldview reframes how we understand the struggle between good and evil. It is not a battlefield of equal powers, but a courtroom of revealed character. God is the judge. The angels are the witnesses. Mastema is the accuser. And humanity is the one on trial, not for guilt predetermined, but for choices yet to be made. In this courtroom, every act of obedience is evidence of righteousness. Every submission to God's order is a statement of truth. And Mastema, for all his malice, can do nothing more than watch and accuse. This is why Jubilees emphasizes the role of angels so clearly. Michael is not a vague symbol of divine power. He is the protector of Israel. Gabriel is not a messenger alone. He defends the righteous. The angel of the presence does not simply speak to Moses. He records every act in the heavenly tablets. The entire structure of the universe, as Jubilees presents it, is governed by a system of observation, remembrance, and judgment. There is no anonymity. There is no randomness. Evil exists, but it is never unnoticed. Modern theology often shifts away from this clarity. In many Christian traditions, the devil is portrayed as the enemy of God's people, but also as the one who dominates the fallen world. His power is presented as overwhelming, his reach vast. Humanity is seen as inherently sinful, incapable of obedience without divine replacement. In such a framework, grace must come not through remembrance but through substitution. Someone must die. Atonement must be paid. The law is abandoned not because it failed, but because humanity failed to uphold it. And Satan, in this view, becomes the jailer holding humanity until Christ pays the price. Jubilees offers no such system. It insists that the law was never impossible, that prophets were never overwhelmed, that Mastema never controlled the righteous. The defense against evil is not a future cross, it is present obedience. It is the structure of time. It is the rhythm of worship. It is the memory of the covenant. Islam, once again, speaks in the same tone. The Quran teaches that guidance is enough, that God does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear, that the messengers are protectors, not placeholders, that Satan can be resisted, that righteousness is within reach. There is no inherited guilt, no fallen nature beyond repair. There is only the path of submission or its rejection. Jubilees holds this same path, and its depiction of Mastema is not meant to frighten but to reveal. The enemy is not hidden. His strategies are known. His boundaries are clear, and his defeat is certain so long as the righteous remember. The remembrance then becomes everything. To forget the law is to open the door to Mastema. To forget the appointed times is to fall out of rhythm with protection. To forget the heavenly tablets is to walk blindly into accusation. But to remember, to keep the law, to follow the calendar, to honor the covenant, is to walk under the eyes of angels, shielded, watched, and guarded. This vision is not mythology, it is structure. Jubilee speaks not in symbols but in systems. The evil spirits act, the holy angels counter, the people choose, and every choice is recorded. So what are we choosing today? Do we recognize the voice of Mastema in the confusion of our worship? Do we see his hand in the shifting calendars, the forgotten feasts, the casual breaking of sacred time? Or have we accepted his whispers as normal? Perhaps the battle is quieter than we thought. Perhaps the war is not waged with fire and thunder. Perhaps it is waged in the quiet moment of decision, when we either remember the law or ignore it. And perhaps the true victory over evil begins not with swords, but with remembrance. The story of Mastema in the Book of Jubilees forces us to confront a version of evil that is neither accidental nor uncontrollable. It is intentional, constrained, and monitored. And perhaps most unsettling of all, it is permitted, not because God delights in corruption, but because he tests with purpose. Evil, in the theology of Jubilees, is not a glitch in the system. It is part of the divine architecture, a trial embedded into time. A whisper aloud only so that silence may be broken by remembrance. It is this controlled permission that reshapes our understanding of rebellion, obedience, and the space in between. Mastema is not destroyed after the flood. He is not bound with the rebellious watchers. He remains because he serves a role. The spirits of the Nephilim, those half-divine, half-human giants, were drowned in the judgment, but their spirits survived. They became the shadowy figures behind humanity's great descent into sorcery, lust, war, and forgetfulness. Mastema rules over them, but even his dominion is divided. Only a tenth are allowed to remain under his command. The rest are imprisoned, cut off, silenced. This is not chaos, it is accounting. Even in judgment there is structure. Jubilee sees the spiritual realm not as a battlefield of unknown powers, but as a courtroom governed by divine order. When Noah steps out of the ark, he is not greeted by a clean slate. The evil remains, the spirits still wander, Mastema still accuses, But God speaks to the angels and gives new instructions. Bind the spirits. Limit their influence. Teach Noah how to guard his children. The law is reaffirmed. The festivals are restored. And a new beginning is marked not by ignorance but by heightened awareness of the enemy's strategies. This cycle repeats. With Abraham, Mastema appears again. He tests Abraham's loyalty. He tempts him to doubt. But each time Abraham responds with worship, sacrifice, remembrance. The key is always memory. Mastema cannot prevail where the law is remembered, but when it is forgotten, his influence spreads. He does not require armies or idols. He only requires distraction. By the time of Moses, Mastema's voice is louder. He seeks to interfere with the Exodus. He tries to kill Moses before the plagues begin. He moves Pharaoh to stubbornness. He confuses the people in the wilderness. Yet in every episode, God limits him. There is a line he cannot cross. This limited authority gives evil its sharpness, but also its futility. The reader of Jubilees sees that no matter how many times Mastema appears, he is never in control. He is allowed, but he is never enthroned. This understanding leaves no room for despair. Evil is never final. Its presence is real, but its dominion is temporary, and its very existence reveals the necessity of obedience. The righteous are not called to escape Mastema, they are called to resist him. And resistance is not found in mystical rituals or cosmic warfare. It is found in remembering the law, in observing the appointed times, in aligning with what is written on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees never presents Mastema as an all-powerful devil. He is not feared in the way modern culture fears the devil. He is acknowledged, exposed, and placed within the structure of judgment. His name means hatred or hostility, but even that name cannot override his limits. He operates under command. His rebellion, if it can be called that, is a request. He does not take, he asks. And God answers, not always with denial, but with direction. Compare this with modern Christianity's concept of Satan. Over centuries, Satan evolved from the legalistic accuser in Job to the roaring lion of Peter's letters to the fallen archangel Lucifer crafted from Isaiah's metaphors. Over time, theology gave him wings, horns, dominion, and mythological weight. But Jubilees never grants Mastema such power. He is not an equal to God. He is not even a rival. He is tolerated because his presence reveals the hearts of men. And this, perhaps, is the core of Jubilees' theology of evil. It is only as powerful as we allow it to be. The law is stronger. The angels are present. The tablets are written. But when those things are ignored, Mastema gains ground. His power is not in force, it is in forgetfulness. When people drift from the calendar, when Sabbaths are desecrated, when feasts are forgotten, when purity is abandoned, Mastema smiles. Not because he has conquered, but because he no longer needs to try. Islam echoes this warning. The Quran repeatedly tells us that Shaitan is our enemy, but also that he has no power over the believers. His trap is forgetfulness, ghafla. His goal is heedlessness. To distract, to delay, to disrupt the remembrance of Allah. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught that Satan runs through the blood of man, but that his influence can be cut off by dhikr, remembrance. Here again, we find Jubilees standing in harmony with a faith that would not emerge until centuries later. Not through direct citation, but through spiritual symmetry. The heavenly tablets in Jubilees function like the preserved tablet in the Quran, al-Law al-Mahfuz. They contain what was, what is, and what will be. They are the eternal record, untouched, guarded, supreme. The angels access them, the prophets teach from them, and those who obey them walk in the light of certainty. Mastema fears the tablets. He fears their memory. He thrives where they are dismissed. So what does this mean for us now? In an age where Sabbaths have become optional, where holy days are renamed, where the calendar is governed by commerce, what would Mastema say? Perhaps nothing at all. He would not need to. He speaks loudest in silence. He works best when the people forget what was written. But the book of Jubilees has returned, and with it the structure comes back into view. Mastema is still permitted, but the righteous are still protected. The festivals are still recorded. The law is still remembered. And the test continues. Not as myth, not as symbol, but as reality. Every day we forget, Mastema steps forward. And every day we remember, he is pushed back. Perhaps the greatest spiritual battle is not waged in visions or revelations, but in the quiet choice to live according to the written will of heaven. Mastema may accuse, but those who remember the law walk with the angels who defend. And the tablets are never erased. The story of Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, is one of the oldest tensions in Scripture, a fracture that echoes across history, faith, and family. In the book of Genesis, the narrative seems settled. Isaac is chosen. Ishmael is sent away. The covenant passes through the younger son, not the firstborn. But the book of Jubilees tells a deeper, more troubling tale, one where the lines of inheritance blur, where memory becomes contested, and where the question of who was chosen becomes more complicated than tradition admits. At its heart lies a buried birthright, not lost by chance, but erased by design. Jubilees preserves many of the same events found in Genesis, but adds details that reframe their meaning. Ishmael is not a forgotten child, nor is Hagar simply a servant woman discarded. Instead, Hagar is named as a daughter of Pharaoh, a woman of royal lineage. Her union with Abraham is not a mistake. It is a strategic and significant covenant. Ishmael is born into the household not as an accident, but as a legitimate heir. And Abraham, for much of his life, sees Ishmael as the one who will carry his legacy. For 14 years, Ishmael is Abraham's only son. He grows in his father's shadow. He learns the language of worship. He walks in the fields where altars are built. He receives the love of a father who has waited decades for an heir. There is no sense in this early period that Ishmael is secondary. He is the firstborn. The promise to Abraham that his offspring will be like the stars of the sky and the sand of the sea begins with him. And when Abraham pleads with God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you," it is not desperation, it is devotion. But then Isaac is born, a miracle child, a son from a barren womb. Jubilees does not downplay Isaac's significance. He is beloved, he is chosen, but the transition is not smooth. The presence of two sons creates tension, not only in the tents of Abraham, but in the theology of later generations. For if Ishmael was the firstborn, and if he too was blessed, then why must he be cast out? Jubilees offers a version of the story that heightens this tension. Sarah, in her jealousy, demands that Hagar and Ishmael be removed. Abraham is distressed, not only for Hagar's sake, but for Ishmael's soul. He fears that without the instruction of the family, Ishmael will fall into idolatry. He does not want to send him away, but God permits it. And the reasoning is strange, not because Ishmael is rejected, but because Isaac is to be the line of the priesthood. The implication is clear. Both sons are blessed, but their roles differ. One carries the priestly line, the other carries the covenant of nations. The Quran reflects this balance. It does not diminish Isaac. He is a prophet, he is honored, but it elevates Ishmael alongside him. Both are righteous, both are promised. And in Islamic tradition, it is Ishmael, not Isaac, who joins Abraham in the construction of the Kaaba. It is Ishmael who is nearly sacrificed. It is Ishmael whose descendants receive the final messenger. The line is not broken, it is completed. In contrast, the biblical narrative suppresses Ishmael's legacy. He is mentioned briefly. His descendants are listed, then ignored. His story ends in the wilderness, but Jubilees does not allow this forgetting. It states that Abraham continued to visit Ishmael, that he instructed him, that he loved him. And when Abraham dies, Ishmael returns. He buries his father beside Isaac. The two sons, for a moment, stand together, equal in grief, equal in duty. This subtle restoration is profound. It suggests that the division between the sons was not theological but tribal, that the promise was big enough for both, that the rift was not God's desire but man's design. And if so, then much of what followed, centuries of conflict, claims of spiritual superiority, rewritten genealogies, was not the unfolding of divine will, but the reshaping of history through selective memory. Jubilees challenges this selectiveness by anchoring the story in covenant law. It says that Abraham gave gifts to all his sons, not just Isaac, that he commanded them all to follow the heavenly tablets, that he urged them to keep the calendar, the feasts, the Sabbaths. The law in this vision is not limited to one lineage. It is offered to every son. And while Isaac carries the priestly line, the path of righteousness is not denied to Ishmael or the others. Islam affirms this inclusiveness. The Quran repeatedly states that guidance was sent to every nation, that the children of Abraham were many, that his house was purified for all who seek truth. Ishmael is not a shadow of Isaac. He is a prophet in his own right, a father of nations, a man who submitted. And so the question becomes sharper. If Ishmael was righteous, if he was blessed, if he was part of the divine plan, then why was his story buried? Why was his lineage diminished? Why did the scribes of later generations not preserve his legacy with the same care? Was it theological discomfort, political power, ethnic rivalry? Jubilees does not answer this directly, but by preserving his presence, by including his voice, it speaks louder than silence. It says, the memory was not lost, it was hidden. And now it returns, to challenge the assumption that only one son mattered, to confront the notion that God can bless only through a single line, to remind us that the firstborn of Abraham walked with God, even when the world turned away. In the deserts where Ishmael wandered and in the tents where Isaac dwelled, the tension between two brothers became the root of 1,000 years of conflict. The Book of Jubilees does not merely record this tension, it probes it, lingers over it, and frames it not as rivalry but as a test. In this version of sacred history, the division between Isaac and Ishmael is not just emotional, it is engineered. Sarah's jealousy, Abraham's heartbreak, God's permitting voice, all these are elements of a larger trial, one that tests the heart of prophecy itself. Who is truly chosen, and what does chosenness mean? Isaac remains the son of the covenant, but that covenant in Jubilees is tied directly to priesthood, to sacrifice, to the order of Levi and the future structure of tabernacle worship. It is Isaac's line that would produce Jacob, then Levi, then Aaron. The fire of the altar would run through his descendants. This is not dismissal of Ishmael, it is specialization. But the tension becomes unbearable when this distinction is turned into exclusion. That is not the doing of heaven. That is the decision of men. Jubilees reminds us that Abraham loved Ishmael, that even after his departure into the wilderness, Abraham visited him. In these visits there was no bitterness recorded, no curse pronounced. Abraham taught him the law, the commandments, the calendar of heaven, the path of righteousness. The same law Isaac received, Ishmael also heard. There is no indication that God revoked the spiritual legacy of Ishmael. In fact, the opposite is true. Jubilees records that Ishmael learned to fear God and that his offspring would become a great nation. The law was not monopolized, it was extended. This view harmonizes perfectly with the Quranic narrative. In Islam, Ishmael is not a rival to Isaac. He is a prophet, a son of Abraham, a builder of the sacred. He is the one who stands beside his father as they raise the foundations of the Kaaba. He is the one nearly sacrificed in the ultimate test of obedience. There is no exclusion, no rejection, no wilderness of shame. There is only obedience and elevation. The Quran never sets Ishmael against Isaac. It honors both. It upholds both as prophets, and it places the final messenger, Mohammed, peace be upon him, in the lineage of Ishmael, not as an outsider reclaiming a lost place, but as a continuation of a line never meant to be forgotten. The implications of this are enormous. If Ishmael's line was never rejected, then the later claim that salvation history flows only through Isaac is not divine decree but human distortion. Jubilees hints at this distortion. It records Abraham's equal treatment of his sons. It emphasizes that he gave gifts to them, taught them, and instructed them to keep the commandments. There is no theological superiority. There is only difference in role. But over time, difference hardened into hierarchy. Hierarchy calcified into exclusion, and exclusion became erasure. The rabbis who compiled the canon, the scribes who shaped the narrative, the theologians who narrowed the scope, they recast Ishmael as wild, as unworthy, as peripheral. But Jubilees kept a thread alive. And through that thread, the story of Ishmael was not lost. It merely waited. In Islamic tradition, that thread became rope, strong, unbreakable. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, declared that he was the answer to Abraham's prayer. The Quran affirms this when it recalls Abraham and Ishmael praying together, saying, "Our Lord, send among them a messenger from among themselves." This was not a new religion born of rebellion. It was a fulfillment of a covenant remembered. Jubilees confirms this pattern. The heavenly tablets, the divine law, the command to uphold righteousness, all these were given to Abraham and taught to his sons. The nations descended from him were to uphold that same law. There was no split in truth, only a split in memory. Some remembered, others forgot, and in that forgetting, division took root. Even within Jubilees, we see the cost of that forgetfulness. Later generations of Ishmael's line fall into idolatry, not because they were cursed, but because they forgot. And so did many in Isaac's line. The distinction was never about blood, it was about memory. Those who remembered walked in the light. Those who forgot wandered. And this is where Jubilees draws a profound line. The real covenant is not biological. It is behavioral. It is not a matter of descent. It is a matter of obedience. Abraham was chosen because he remembered. So too were his sons. When they remembered, they were blessed. When they forgot, they fell. This theology erases any claim of spiritual exclusivity. Jubilees makes no room for racial covenant. There is no eternal promise for a people simply because of birth. There is only the law and the choice to keep it. Ishmael kept it, and so did Isaac. Their unity in obedience was the true inheritance. The tragedy of later history is that this unity was dismantled. The sons of Isaac claimed sole ownership of divine truth. The sons of Ishmael were labeled as castaways, and the story was rewritten. Jubilees, though never canonized, stands as a rebuke to that rewriting. And Islam stands with it. Not in direct citation, but in spirit. In Islam, Abraham is not the father of one nation. He is the imam of mankind. The Quran gives him that title. He is the one who breaks the idols, who builds the house, who submits without question. Ishmael follows him. Isaac does too, and the path is wide enough for both. The Book of Jubilees, though buried for centuries, refuses to forget this. It records what others erased. It names the sons. It preserves the covenant. And in doing so, it gently asks, what if the division between Isaac and Ishmael was never meant to be permanent? What if we were told only half the story? And what if the other half, long buried in the sands of forgotten scripture, is now rising again, to remind us that the birthright was never meant for one son alone? but for all who remember the law. The final thread in the story of Isaac and Ishmael does not unravel with hatred, but with silence. A silence carefully stitched into the pages of official scripture, a silence shaped not by divine decree, but by selective remembrance. The Book of Jubilees, lost for centuries and excluded from the canon, whispers what the mainstream record conceals, that both sons were faithful, both sons were taught the same law, and both sons bore the legacy of Abraham. This forgotten harmony now stands in contrast to the fractured world it could have prevented. When Abraham died, Jubilees tells us Ishmael returned. He stood beside Isaac to bury their father. There was no sword between them, no curse on their tongues, only dust and mourning. That scene, so brief yet profound, hints at what could have been. The unity of the sons was not impossible, it was ignored. Because later generations sought to claim the covenant exclusively, they buried not just Abraham but the memory of his wider family. They buried Ishmael's role in prophecy, his contribution to obedience, his place in sacred history. But the Book of Jubilees never forgets. It preserves a world where the sons of Abraham were not rivals but reflections. Jubilees reveals that Ishmael was given instruction in righteousness. He was not sent away to be forgotten, but to grow into his own legacy under the same divine guidance. And what is righteousness in Jubilees? It is remembrance of the heavenly tablets. It is obedience to the calendar of God. It is reverence for the festivals, the Sabbaths, the sacred times. It is living in sync with the law that governs both angels and men. Ishmael learned this. He practiced it. He taught it to his children. And the implications of that simple truth are immense. If Ishmael received the same divine instruction, then the law was never meant to be exclusive. It was not given to one nation, but entrusted to many. And if that law continued through Ishmael's descendants, even if distorted by forgetfulness or distance, then the revival of that law through the final prophet of Islam is not innovation, it is restoration, a return to the covenant that once bound both sons. The Quran affirms this restoration. It declares that Abraham was neither Jew nor Christian, but a man of pure monotheism, Hanif, one who submitted himself entirely to God. And it affirms that Ishmael, alongside Isaac, was a prophet. Both are honored, both are righteous, but it is Ishmael's descendants who inherit the role of final preservation, not because they are superior, but because the covenant reawakened among them. The buried birthright resurfaced. This contradicts the traditional biblical view, which sees Ishmael as rejected. It paints him as wild, unpredictable, a father of unholy nations. But the Book of Jubilees quietly dismantles that bias. It records Abraham's prayers for Ishmael, God's affirmation of Ishmael's future, and the equal teaching of the law to all Abraham's children. The divide is not divine, it is editorial, and the exclusion of Jubilees from the canon may be the strongest evidence of that editorial fear. Why would a book that honors both sons be cast out? Why would a text that shows Abraham visiting Ishmael, instructing him in righteousness, and preparing him for covenantal life be hidden from the generations that followed? The answer lies not in theology but in politics. By the time religious authorities canonized the Hebrew Scriptures, the rivalry between emerging faith communities had hardened. A narrative of singular chosenness served their identity. But Jubilees did not fit. It was too inclusive, too generous with prophecy, too faithful to forgotten sons. Islam reclaims that generosity without apology. It teaches that all prophets are brothers, that their message is one, that no people are abandoned unless they abandon remembrance, that divine truth is not chained to bloodline but to behavior. Jubilees stands as an early echo of this same message. In its pages, the legalism of later traditions fades, and in its place stands a vision of family, diverse, righteous, struggling to remember what was once shared. And what was shared? A covenant based on remembrance, not ethnicity, not geography, but submission. Jubilees repeats this theme with clarity. Abraham is praised because he obeyed. Isaac is blessed because he remembered. Ishmael is honored because he was taught. The covenant passes not by blood alone, but by remembrance of the law. That is the true birthright. So what then is the buried birthright? It is not land. It is not temple. It is not priesthood. It is submission to divine order. It is obedience to the eternal law that existed before Mount Sinai, before Moses, before the golden calf and the broken tablets. Jubilees teaches that this law was written in heaven before it was spoken on earth, and Abraham passed it to both his sons. In modern times, the echoes of that buried birthright stir once more. As scholars rediscover Jubilees and the apocryphal texts once considered dangerous, new light is cast on old assumptions. The Quran, long dismissed in Western theological circles, begins to align with truths buried in ancient scrolls, and the Islamic narrative of Abraham and Ishmael begins to look less like deviation and more like preservation. This is not a call for syncretism or theological compromise. It is a call to remember that Abraham was not the father of division, but the father of nations. To remember that Ishmael was not a mistake, but a messenger. To remember that the true inheritance is not possession, but obedience. Jubilees ends the story of Isaac and Ishmael not with hostility, but with convergence. Both sons appear to honor their father, both carry the memory of his journey, and both walk away carrying parts of a whole. But only one story was canonized. The other was buried. Now, through Jubilees and through the message of Islam, that buried story is being unearthed. And it asks a question that still burns. If Ishmael was never rejected, if the covenant was wider than one line, if the law was taught to all of Abraham's sons, then who buried the birthright? And what are we willing to remember to uncover it? Long before Moses climbed the slopes of Sinai, long before the thunder cracked and the mountain shook, long before the stone tablets were carved by the finger of God, there was already a law. This law was not invented at Sinai. It was remembered there. The Book of Jubilees lifts the veil on this sacred memory and speaks of a time when the laws that would define Israel's covenant were already known, already practiced, and already recorded, not on earth, but in heaven. The heavenly tablets, central to the vision of Jubilees, did not begin with Moses. They began at creation. This idea shatters the traditional biblical timeline. In the mainstream reading of the Torah, the law begins with Moses. The festivals, the sacrifices, the priesthood, all are introduced in the wilderness after the Exodus. But Jubilees rewrites that understanding entirely. It reveals a framework in which Adam, the very first man, was already aware of sacred time. He kept the Sabbath. He understood the division of days. He taught his children to bring offerings, not spontaneously, but according to a system. That system was written in the heavenly tablets, the divine record that existed before the world began. When Cain and Abel brought their offerings, Jubilees tells us they did so according to a known calendar. Abel's offering of the firstborn lambs was not an emotional gesture, it was obedience to a pattern. Cain's failure was not simply jealousy, it was deviation from divine instruction. Their story becomes not just a moral tragedy, but a legal one, a misalignment with the sacred time of heaven. The generations that followed did not walk blindly. Jubilees describes how Enoch received the heavenly tablets, how he recorded the divisions of days, the weeks of years, the Jubilees themselves. He became the guardian of time, the prophet who watched the movement of the heavens and aligned the rhythm of earth to match. Noah inherited this knowledge. After the flood, he rebuilt the calendar. He offered sacrifices on the appointed days. He reestablished the Sabbaths. And when Abraham came into the world, he too inherited the memory of sacred time. Abraham, according to Jubilees, did not invent worship. He rediscovered it. He read the books of his forefathers. He aligned himself with the calendar they kept. He celebrated the feast of the first month. He kept the festival of weeks. He observed the seventh day. He even circumcised himself and his household, not as a cultural rite, but as a command from the heavenly tablets. Every act of Abraham's righteousness was not innovation, but restoration. This vision reverses the assumptions of many. It declares that the divine law is not ethnic, not temporal, not newly introduced in the wilderness. It is eternal. It is part of creation itself. Jubilees speaks of the law as the framework of reality. The sun, moon, and stars were set in motion according to it. The seasons exist because of it. Even the angelic order abides by it. To live according to the law, then, is to live in sync with the design of the cosmos. This cosmic law includes more than Sabbath and sacrifice. It includes the moral commands later given at Sinai. Jubilees records that Noah instructed his sons not to drink blood, not to eat unclean animals, not to commit fornication, not to shed innocent blood. These laws are not presented as newly revealed. They are ancient. They are part of what God taught humanity from the beginning. The covenant at Sinai becomes, in this light, not the birth of morality, but its renewal. A reminder to a forgetful people. This view aligns remarkably with Islamic understanding. In the Quran, the Sharia is not a new invention brought by Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is the final articulation of an eternal path. The Quran tells us that all prophets were given a share of the same law, that Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad called their people to the same submission. And just as in Jubilees, Islam teaches that righteous individuals before the advent of Moses still lived according to divine guidance. They were judged by their remembrance. Their obedience was real. So what does it mean if the law was known before Moses? It means that the structure of righteousness has always existed, that accountability was always in place, that men were never without instruction, and that God's justice was never delayed by ignorance. It also means that the claim of religious exclusivity collapses. If Adam, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and even Isaac and Jacob lived by the heavenly law, then it belongs to no one nation. It belongs to all who remember. This presents a quiet but profound challenge to both Judaism and Christianity. In Jewish tradition, the Torah is the central moment of covenant. In Christian thought, it is the precursor to grace, fulfilled and set aside by Christ. But in Jubilees, the law is neither beginning nor obsolete. It is eternal, and it demands remembrance, not replacement. Islam echoes this call. The Quran commands remembrance. The prayer times, the fasting days, the sacred months, they are not arbitrary. They are rooted in cosmic design. The believer aligns himself to them not out of ritualism, but out of submission to a deeper order. This is the same pattern found in Jubilees. Time is sacred, not because of tradition, but because of creation. The Book of Jubilees, long dismissed as a legalistic relic, now reveals itself as a bridge. It connects the law of Sinai to the worship of Abraham. It links the festivals of Israel to the altars of the patriarchs. It shows a world where righteousness is not spontaneous, but structured. A world where divine expectation did not begin with Moses, but was merely renewed through him. And in this quiet revelation, a question begins to form. If the law was already known before Moses, then what was Sinai? A reminder or a warning? Perhaps it was both. In the vision of Jubilees, time is not secular. It is sacred by design. Every week is crowned by a seventh day that remembers the Creator. Every month is structured by phases and signs that echo the lights of heaven. Every year turns upon appointed festivals that mirror divine moments, etched not only into human experience but into the heavenly tablets. This is the structure Adam was taught. This is the system Enoch recorded. And this is the law Abraham upheld. Jubilees insists that these patterns were never dependent on Sinai, never introduced by Moses. They were embedded in the world's beginning, as fundamental as gravity, as constant as breath. The festivals that Israel later receives at Sinai, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, are described in Jubilees not as new holy days, but as ancient celebrations restored. Jubilees tells us that Noah observed the Feast of Weeks after the flood, giving thanks for deliverance. It tells us that Abraham kept it as well, calling it the Feast of the First Fruits. He did not wait for tablets from Sinai to recognize sacred time. He inherited it through prophetic lineage. Isaac and Jacob followed the same path, not because they were Israelites, but because they remembered. They remembered what had already been given. This remembrance was more than ritual. It was spiritual survival. Jubilees ties the forgetting of the law to the rise of corruption. When generations abandon the calendar, evil spirits increase. When sacred time is profaned, society crumbles. The Sabbaths are not merely days of rest, they are protective boundaries. The festivals are not empty meals, they are anchors of obedience. When the rhythm of heaven is broken, chaos enters. This theology turns righteousness into a rhythm and sin into dissonance. The implication is immense. Holiness is alignment. The truly righteous are not merely sincere, they are synchronized. Their prayers fall on appointed days. Their actions mirror cosmic design. This idea finds deep resonance in Islam. The 5 daily prayers, each marked by the movement of the sun, form a daily calendar. The lunar months determine fasting, pilgrimage, and charity. Sacred time in Islam is not invented, it is inherited. And this inherited time reflects the same rhythm Jubilees describes. Jubilees goes even further by warning of a future corruption. It claims that the children of Israel, after entering the land, would forget the appointed times. They would follow the Gentile calendar. They would set aside the Sabbaths and ignore the feasts. And when they did, destruction would follow. This was not merely a moral failure, it was a cosmic dislocation. They were warned not because God delights in threat, but because He desires remembrance. Jubilee speaks with urgency, not judgment. The Quran echoes this prophetic grief. Over and over it mourns how previous nations forgot their scriptures, abandoned their covenants, and turned sacred worship into rituals without heart. It speaks of the Sabbath being broken, of festivals being turned into prideful displays. The same corruption described in Jubilees is lamented in Islam, and the same solution is offered: return, remember, realign with the divine rhythm. This is why the Book of Jubilees gives such attention to the heavenly tablets. These are not metaphors. They are literal records kept by angels, read by prophets, and offered as a mirror to humanity. The law in Jubilees is not evolving. It is constant. The only question is, who will remember? Who will live by what was written before the earth was formed? In this framework, Moses becomes not a lawgiver in the original sense, but a revealer. He receives the tablets, but they are copies of what already exists. The angel of the presence does not dictate new words. He reminds Moses of the law the patriarchs kept, the feasts Noah observed, the calendar Enoch guarded. Moses becomes the messenger of remembrance, not innovation. This is a quiet but radical shift from how many religious traditions portray him. Jubilees thus offers a more ancient covenant than many realize, a covenant based on alignment, not ethnicity. And if alignment with the heavenly calendar is what defines righteousness, then the door of covenant is wide open. Anyone who remembers may enter. Anyone who obeys may belong. The boundaries of salvation are not tribal, they are temporal. Time becomes the map. The festivals become the checkpoints. The law becomes the road. This challenges the theology of replacement. In Christianity, the law is often portrayed as temporary, a shadow of Christ, fulfilled and set aside. But if the law predates Moses, if it is woven into creation, then it cannot be discarded. It cannot be fulfilled by removal. It can only be fulfilled by remembrance. And that is precisely what Islam claims to do. Islam never dismisses the previous laws. Instead, it restores them. The Quran says that the Prophet was sent to confirm the scriptures that came before, to make clear what was distorted and to call people back to the straight path. That straight path is not new. It is the ancient law, the rhythm of sacred time, the prayer, the fast, the sacred months, the pilgrimage. Each element finds its echo in Jubilees. Even the structure of revelation in Islam mirrors Jubilees. The Quran describes a preserved tablet, al-Law al-Mahfuz, from which all guidance is derived. It is the heavenly source of truth. The same is true in Jubilees. The heavenly tablets are the source of law, of history, of judgment. Angels read from them, prophets are shown them, and the righteous align themselves with them. If both traditions speak of a law written in heaven, if both describe a cosmic calendar, if both see prophets as restorers and not inventors, then perhaps their message is the same. Perhaps the divisions we see today were never meant to be. Perhaps they were the result of forgetfulness, not design. Jubilees ends many of its sections with a call to remember. Not simply to remember stories, but to remember times, seasons, festivals, Sabbaths. Because in remembering, righteousness is revived, and in forgetting, the world descends again into chaos. We are not called to believe without structure. We are called to walk in a rhythm that existed before our ancestors were born, a rhythm known to the stars, a law written in heaven, and a covenant that never needed a mountain to begin, only hearts willing to remember. So the question returns, ancient and sharp. If the law was already known before Moses, then what have we forgotten? And how long until we remember again? The final chapter in this story of sacred time turns not to past festivals or ancient prophets, but to us. The Book of Jubilees does not merely retell history, it repositions the reader inside that history. It reminds us that the question is not whether the law once existed, but whether it was ever truly forgotten. In every age, the struggle is the same. Some remember, most forget. But the tablets remain, eternal, unchanged, waiting for the hearts of men to realign with the rhythm they still declare. Jubilees closes with warnings and hope. It sees the generations after Moses falling into darkness, not because the law failed, but because the people failed to keep it. They substituted calendars, they forgot Sabbaths, they altered the feasts. They began to measure time not by heaven's order, but by human preference. And when they did, the order of creation was disrupted. Wars began, idols multiplied, prophets were rejected. The law became a scroll on a shelf rather than a lamp for the path. Yet Jubilees is not a book of despair. It is a call to restoration. It tells of a day when the righteous will arise once more, not with new revelation, but with old remembrance. This theology rests on a quiet but powerful claim that divine law never leaves. It is always present, always accessible, always inscribed on the heavenly tablets. Jubilees urges each generation to return, not by innovation but by restoration. And the only path back is memory. To remember the calendar, the Sabbaths, the festivals, the order of days. Because when time is realigned, so is the soul. Islam answers that call. Its structure is not arbitrary. The lunar months are appointed. The sacred months are honored. The fast of Ramadan realigns the body and soul to time's original purpose. The pilgrimage of Dhul Hijjah is not a cultural ritual. It is a re-entry into Abraham's sacred memory. Friday becomes the echo of the original Sabbath, not in contradiction but in continuity. The Quran states that it confirms the books that came before. It does not reinvent time, it remembers it. In this remembrance, Islam echoes the very heartbeat of Jubilees. And perhaps that is why the book of Jubilees was hidden, not because it was false, but because it was too close to a truth others were not ready to hear. A truth that undermined monopoly. A truth that lifted the law out of ethnicity and placed it back in eternity. A truth that suggested the law was not given to one people in one desert, but to all who align with the Creator's calendar. Jubilees gives that law to Adam, to Noah, to Abraham, to Ishmael, to Isaac, to Jacob. And so the claim that only Israel received it becomes fragile. In that fragility, later canonizers buried the book, and with it, they buried the idea that time itself was sacred before Sinai, that prophets were law-keepers before there was a priesthood, that God's calendar was not confined to Canaan, but observed even in the wilderness, in exile, in foreign lands. But the Quran refused to forget, and in the recitation of divine rhythm, Islam revived what Jubilees preserved. Today, most believers live disconnected from sacred time. Calendars are built around work weeks, holidays tied to culture, and seasons measured by school schedules. The moon no longer guides the soul. The Sabbath is a relic. The festivals are allegorized. But time, in heaven's view, never changed. The heavenly tablets still mark the appointed days, and the angels still celebrate the sacred weeks. The question is not whether the order remains. It is whether we are willing to return to it. Jubilee says that at the end of days, the righteous will rise and realign the world with God's original rhythm. That a generation will appear who no longer follow the Gentile calendars, who restore the Sabbaths, who honor the feasts not out of nostalgia but out of obedience. This is not a fantasy. It is a calling. And that calling echoes through Islam, through the disciplined calendar, the prayers marked by the sun, the months defined by the moon, and the festivals commanded by revelation. Not one act is random. Every worship is a clock. Every command is a compass. The unity between Jubilees and Islam is startling. Though separated by language, geography, and centuries, both declare the same truth, that the law is eternal, that time is sacred, and that righteousness is remembering. They both challenge the notion of a disposable covenant. They both confront the idea that newness means superiority. Instead, they both lift up what was always written but often ignored. So now we arrive at the final question. If Moses did not invent the law but restored it, if the prophets lived by the law long before Sinai, if time itself was carved with sacred rhythm from the first dawn, then what excuse remains for our forgetfulness? The answer is not shame, it is invitation. The book of Jubilees invites. The Quran invites. The law was not given to burden but to beautify, to align our brief lives with the eternal pulse of the cosmos. It is not a prison of rules but a map of sacred time. It teaches when to rest, when to fast, when to celebrate, when to give, when to walk, and when to fall in prostration. These are not rituals. They are harmonies. They are songs composed before the world began. The heavenly tablets have never changed. They wait, they speak, and for those who listen, they still sing. The law of Moses was not the beginning. It was the reminder, the restoration, and the proof that sacred time was never forgotten by heaven, only by us.